Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a medieval stonemason's quarry, and trust me, you're going to feel every aching muscle, taste every particle of limestone dust, and wonder why anyone would choose this life voluntarily. Picture this. It's barely dawn. The sky still that bruised purple-gray that makes you question whether the sun even plans to show up today. You're standing at the edge of a massive gouged wound in the earth, a quarry that's been eating its way into the hillside for generations. The air smells like wet rock and sweat and something metallic you can't quite place. Maybe blood, maybe just the iron content in the stone itself. Around you, dozens of men are already moving in the half-light, shadows with hammers, and the first crack of steel on stone echoes across the pit like a gunshot. You probably won't survive this. By the way, statistically speaking, your chances of making it through a career in medieval quarry work without serious injury or early death are about as good as your chances of becoming a TikTok star in the 1300s. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these bedtime stories travel. Someone's always listening from somewhere wonderfully weird, and it makes my day. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cold hits you first. It's May, theoretically spring, but at this elevation in the Cotswolds or maybe the limestone belt near Caen in Normandy, the chill clings to the rock face like it's got a personal vendetta against warmth. You're wearing what passes for work clothes in 1243. A rough wool tunic that's already stiff with yesterday's sweat and dust, woolen hose that itch like they're woven from pure regret, and leather shoes so thin you can feel every pebble through the sole. No steel-toed boots here, no hard hats, no OSHA inspector's clipboard ready to shut this operation down. Just you, the stone, and a whole lot of optimism that today won't be the day a rock decides to reshape your skull. You trudge down the wooden ladder into the quarry proper, and let's be honest, calling it a ladder is generous. It's more like a tree trunk with notches hacked into it, slick with morning dew and moss, each step a small negotiation with gravity. Around you, the quarry is waking up in stages. The older masons, the ones whose backs have already curved into permanent question marks, are lighting small fires in metal braziers to warm their tools. There's actual science behind this. Cold metal is brittle, and a frozen chisel will shatter on first impact, sending fragments into your face like medieval shrapnel. But nobody here calls it science. Old Thomas just mutters something about waking the iron and holds his hammer over the flames like he's performing some pagan ritual, which, honestly, might be exactly what's happening. The master mason arrives precisely at first light because of course he does. His name is Guillaume, and he's got that weathered look of a man who's been breathing stone dust since childhood but somehow hasn't died yet. A walking statistical anomaly. He's carrying the templates, wooden patterns that match the exact specifications sent down from whatever cathedral or castle is currently demanding limestone blocks. These templates are sacred. They're your blueprint, your grade card, your entire reason for existing in this hole. If your stone doesn't match the template, it's rubble. If it's rubble, you don't get paid. Simple as that. Guillaume doesn't waste time on motivational speeches. He points to a section of the quarry face where the stone allegedly runs true, meaning the limestone beds are relatively horizontal, relatively free of major faults, and relatively less likely to kill you. Relatively is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. You're assigned to a gang of 4, yourself, a journeyman named Peter who's maybe 25 but looks 40, a teenager called Small John who's ironically built like a brick wall, and an older man everyone just calls Flanders because apparently that's where he's from and medieval people weren't exactly creative with nicknames. Your first task sounds simple. Expose the bed. The quarry face in front of you is partially dressed. Previous crews have already removed the overburden, the useless soil and broken rock on top, but your specific block is still half buried. You need to clear away the debris, trace the natural bedding planes of the limestone, and figure out where to make your first cut. This is detective work disguised as manual labor. Limestone, you see, has a grain, sort of like wood, though the masons call them beds, because the stone was laid down in ancient seas, layer by compressed layer, back when this whole area was underwater and dinosaurs were still trying to figure out how to run an effective PR campaign. Peter hands you a tool that looks like an oversized crowbar with a flat, chisel-like end. It's called a jumper, and its entire purpose is to be slammed into cracks and levered until something gives, either the rock or your shoulder joint. You wedge it into a promising-looking fissure in the stone face and throw your weight behind it. Nothing happens. You try again. Still nothing. Small John grins at you with the kind of amusement that suggests he's watched countless newbies fail at this exact spot. Then Flanders shows you the trick. You don't just push, you bounce it, using the tool's weight and leverage in a rhythmic motion that's half technique, half interpretive dance. On your third attempt, something shifts. A crack propagates with a sound like a frozen lake breaking up, and suddenly a chunk of overburden the size of a large dog comes loose, missing your foot by maybe 3 inches. Quicker reflexes than the last one, Peter observes mildly, which you later realize is his way of saying the previous apprentice in your spot lost 2 toes in his first week. Now comes the part where you truly understand why this job was never going to be a long-term career prospect for you. You need to remove this rubble, and by remove, I mean physically carry it out of the quarry. There are no wheelbarrows, no conveyor belts, no convenient dump trucks. Just a woven basket that looks like it was designed to carry apples, not rocks, and your increasingly unhappy spine. You load the basket with chunks of limestone, each piece weighing anywhere from 5 to 20 pounds, until the whole thing probably tips the scales at 60 or 70 pounds. Then you hoist it onto your back and start climbing. Remember that sketchy ladder you came down? You're going back up it, with 70 pounds of rock trying to pull you backward into the pit. Your thighs are burning by the 3rd rung. By the 10th, you're genuinely questioning your life choices. And you've got to make this trip maybe 40 times today. Maybe 50 if Guillaume is feeling ambitious. The dump site is a growing pile of waste stone that'll eventually be used for rubble fill in building projects. But right now it's just the mountain of shame where all your effort goes to die. 3 hours in, your hands are already blistering. The rope handles on the basket are cutting into your palms, and you can feel the hot spots forming, little pockets of fluid gathering under the skin, getting ready to pop and make your life even more miserable. Around you, other work gangs are in various stages of their own struggles. One group has successfully isolated a large block, and they're now driving wooden wedges into a pre-cut channel, preparing for the split. Another team is arguing loudly about whether their stone has a hidden fault line. This argument matters because if they split the block and it fractures wrong, they've just wasted 3 days of work. The quarry has its own acoustic signature. There's the constant tap-tap-tap of hammers on chisels, the occasional crack of splitting stone, the scrape of metal on rock, and underneath it all, a low chorus of coughing. Everyone's coughing. The dust is inescapable, a fine white powder that hangs in the air and coats everything. Your clothes, your hair, the inside of your nostrils, your teeth. You spit and it comes out gray. You wipe your face and your hand comes away white. This dust is limestone, calcium carbonate, and while it's not as immediately lethal as silica dust from sandstone quarries, it's still grinding away at your lungs with every breath. Historians still argue whether medieval workers understood the connection between stone dust and respiratory disease, but the evidence is right there in skeletal remains. Masons' lungs often show characteristic scarring and damage that would make a modern pulmonologist weep. By midday, the sun has burned off the morning chill, and now the quarry is its own special kind of hell. A sun trap that reflects heat off pale stone walls and turns the pit into a convection oven. You're sweating through your tunic, which would be fine except that the limestone dust is mixing with your sweat to form a kind of gritty paste that chafes everywhere fabric touches skin. Inner thighs, armpits, the back of your neck. It's like being slowly sanded down by your own clothes. Lunch is bread, hard cheese, and weak ale, eaten sitting on a rock with dust-covered hands because there's nowhere clean to sit and no way to wash up anyway. The bread has stone grit in it too, probably from the hands that carried it here. You eat it anyway because you're burning calories at a rate that would make a modern CrossFit enthusiast jealous, and your body doesn't care about dental enamel right now, it just needs fuel. Small John tells you a story between bites, something about a quarryman 2 years back who found a seam of perfect limestone. No faults, beautiful grain. The kind of stone that makes master masons weep with joy. The guy got so excited he cut too aggressively, didn't bother checking the overhead, and brought down a shelf of rock that buried him completely. They pulled him out in pieces, Small John says cheerfully, like he's describing a particularly interesting market day. Spread him out on a board to figure out what went where. Never did find his left hand, though. This is medieval workplace humor, and you're expected to laugh or at least grunt appreciatively. The afternoon stretches into more of the same. Hauling, clearing, exposing the bedding planes. Your gang has finally reached clean stone, and Peter makes the call on where to place the first separation cut. This is skilled work. He's reading the stone like you might read a book, looking for subtle color variations that indicate changes in density, tracing hairline cracks that might propagate if stressed, judging the angle of the beds relative to the quarry face. One wrong call here and you could spend days cutting out a block that shatters the moment you try to move it. Guillaume comes by to inspect. He runs his hands over the exposed face, actually presses his cheek against it like he's listening for the stone's secrets, then nods. "Cut here," he says, dragging a piece of chalk along a line. "Follow the bed, 2 cubits deep, then we'll wedge it." A cubit is roughly 18 inches, though it varies depending on whose forearm you're using, as the standard medieval measurements are delightfully inconsistent, which makes precision stonemasonry a genuine miracle. Now comes the cutting. Peter and Flanders take the lead on this because they've got the experience and you've got the likely to mess this up energy. They use long saws, iron blades about 3 feet long with handles at both ends. But here's where it gets interesting. They're not just sawing. They're pouring water mixed with abrasive sand into the cut as they work. The sand is doing the actual cutting, grinding away at the limestone grain by grain, while the saw just keeps it moving in the groove. It's agonizingly slow. They'll be lucky to cut through this in 6 hours, maybe 8. You and Small John are on sand and water duty, which sounds easy until you realize you're basically kneeling beside 2 guys doing the medieval equivalent of chainsawing through rock, trying to pour a steady trickle of gritty water into a channel without getting in the way of the saw blade, which could easily take off a finger if their rhythm breaks and your hand is in the wrong spot. The sun is starting to drop toward the horizon when Guillaume calls time. The cut is maybe halfway through. Tomorrow you'll finish it, drive in the wedges, and if the stone gods are smiling, you'll have a several-ton block of usable limestone ready for dressing. If the stone gods are indifferent or actively hostile, you'll have an expensive pile of gravel and the kind of professional shame that follows you to other quarries. You climb out for the last time today, your legs actually trembling with fatigue. The path home is 2 miles of packed earth, and every step feels like you're walking through wet concrete. Your hands have graduated from blisters to open sores. Your back feels like someone's been using it for hammer practice. The dust in your lungs has settled into a tight feeling that makes you cough with every deep breath. And tomorrow you'll wake up before dawn and do this all over again. For decades, if you're unlucky enough to live that long. Welcome to the quarry. Try not to die on day 1. You wake up the next morning convinced that someone has replaced your entire muscular system with broken glass and regret. Every muscle you didn't know you had is now filing a formal complaint, and several muscles you were pretty sure were just decorative have gone on strike entirely. Your hands are the worst. Those blisters from yesterday have popped overnight, and now you've got raw patches of skin that make gripping anything feel like squeezing a cactus. But here's the thing about medieval quarry work. Nobody cares. There's no sick day policy, no workers' compensation, no sympathetic supervisor telling you to take it easy. The stone doesn't care about your pain, and neither does anyone else. You stumble back to the quarry in the pre-dawn darkness, and this is when you start to understand the pecking order, the strict, unforgiving hierarchy that governs every aspect of this operation. At the very bottom, you've got the quarrymen, the haulers, the manual labor force that does the actual extraction. That's you, congratulations. One rung up are the rough masons or hewers, the guys who can take a raw block and shape it into something vaguely resembling the right dimensions. Above them sit the Freemasons. And yes, that's where that term comes from, though the guys wearing funny aprons in modern lodges would probably faint if you dropped them into a medieval quarry. Freemasons work freestone, high-quality limestone or sandstone that can be carved in any direction without splitting. These are your skilled craftsmen, the ones who can turn a block into an archstone or a decorative corbel. At the top of this pyramid, perched like a particularly judgmental gargoyle, is the master mason. That's Guillaume, who reports directly to whoever's funding this operation, maybe a bishop, maybe a noble, maybe a wealthy merchant guild. The master mason has served his apprenticeship, his journeyman years, and proven he can not only cut stone but read architectural plans, manage crews, estimate costs, and somehow keep dozens of workers from killing each other or themselves. It's a position that commands serious respect and serious money. Guillaume probably makes in a week what you'll make in 3 months, assuming you survive that long. But here's where it gets really interesting. You can't just decide you want to jump up the ladder. This isn't a meritocracy where hard work automatically equals advancement. The guild system controls everything. To become a Freemason, you need to complete a formal apprenticeship, typically 7 years of basically indentured servitude to a master, learning the secrets of the trade. And I do mean secrets. The Masons' guilds guard their knowledge like it's nuclear launch codes. Special techniques for reading stone, for cutting complex curves, for creating templates. This stuff is passed down master to apprentice in hushed tones, never written down, definitely not shared with outsiders. The reason for this secrecy is pure economics. If everyone knew how to cut stone properly, Masons couldn't command premium wages. Scarcity creates value, and the guilds maintain scarcity through strict control of who gets trained and how. They also maintain quality standards. A guild-certified Mason's work has to meet certain specifications or they can lose their certification, which is basically a career death sentence. Historians still argue whether this guild system was primarily about protecting quality or protecting profits, but honestly, it was probably both. People are complicated like that, even medieval people. Peter pulls you aside that second morning and gives you the talk. "You see the way Flanders makes that cut?" he says, gesturing to where the older man is carefully chiseling a channel in yesterday's partially sawed block. 45 degrees to the bed, following the grain, pressure on the downstroke only? That's 40 years of experience right there. You could watch him every day for a year and still not understand why he does it that way. That's journeyman knowledge. Peter himself is in that weird middle zone, skilled enough to be trusted with important cuts, not yet experienced enough to be called a master. He's probably making decent money by medieval standards, enough to rent a room instead of sleeping in a barn, enough to eat meat once a week, enough to think about maybe getting married someday if he can save up the bride price. Small John, despite being built like he could personally carry cathedral stones up a mountain, is in the same boat as you, unskilled labor. The difference is he's been doing it for 3 years and has accepted his fate. "I'm not clever enough for the guild," he tells you matter-of-factly while you're both hauling another basket of rubble. "Can't read, can't do the geometry they need for the fancy cuts. But I'm strong. I show up, and I don't complain. That's worth something. It's worth about 3 pennies a day, which is just enough to keep him fed, housed in a shared sleeping space with 8 other workers, and perpetually 1 bad injury away from complete destitution." The quarry master, not to be confused with the master mason because medieval job titles were designed to confuse future historians, is a guy named Robert who owns the actual land and the extraction rights. He doesn't do any physical work himself. He's management in the purest sense. Robert negotiates contracts with cathedral chapters and castle builders, arranges transport for the finished stones, handles payments to the work crews, and generally makes sure this entire operation turns a profit. He shows up around mid-morning in clothes that aren't covered in stone dust, which immediately marks him as someone important. The man's tunic is actually dyed a consistent color, blue, probably woad-based, which isn't cheap, and his boots are real leather, not the thin scraped hide that you're wearing. Robert does a walking inspection, stops to examine the block your gang is working on, runs his hand along Peter's cut line, and grunts. You're learning that grunts are the primary form of communication in medieval industry. A satisfied grunt means continue. A dissatisfied grunt means fix it. A really angry grunt means someone's probably getting docked pay. This grunt is neutral, which you'll take as a win. "Cathedral needs 200 dressed stones by Michaelmas," Robert announces to Guillaume. "Choir arch, specific dimensions." He hands over a piece of parchment with drawings that look like they were made by someone who understood geometry but had never heard of artistic talent. Guillaume studies it, holding it up to catch the morning light, and you can see him doing mental calculations. 200 stones for months, accounting for weather delays, broken blocks, that one guy who's definitely going to fall off something and need replacing. "We'll need to open the north face," Guillaume says. "Stones better there, fewer faults. And I'll need another experienced hewer. The boy from Toulouse, if he's available." The boy from Toulouse is apparently 35 years old. but everyone under 40 is the boy in this industry. Age is relative when your life expectancy is 45 on a good day. This is how you learn that the quarry operates on multiple levels, literally and figuratively. The section where you've been working is producing decent quality building stone, the bulk material for walls and foundations. But for the really important stuff, the carved details and precision pieces, they use stone from a different part of the quarry entirely, where the limestone runs particularly fine and consistent. That's where the Freemasons work, in a separate area that's almost sanctified ground. You don't go there unless invited. Small John tried once, out of curiosity, and got verbally eviscerated by an old mason who acted like he'd walked into a church during Mass wearing muddy boots. Around the quarry, you start noticing the unspoken rules, the social hierarchies that govern every interaction. When Guillaume speaks, everyone shuts up and listens. When Robert, the quarry master, shows up, even Guillaume modulates his tone to something resembling deference. When the Freemasons need something, the rough masons provide it. When the rough masons need something, the laborers like you fetch it. It's feudalism in miniature playing out in a hole in the ground. But there's also a weird kind of camaraderie within each level. The laborers help each other out, sharing water, warning about loose rock, covering for someone who needs to take an emergency bathroom break in the bushes. There's an understanding that you're all in this together, all equally likely to be crushed or maimed, all equally disposable in the grand scheme of things. When a new worker shows up, a teenager named Martin who looks terrified and is clearly wondering what he's gotten himself into, Small John immediately takes him under his wing, showing him the rope techniques, the climbing paths, the spots where the rock tends to flake unexpectedly. "Look after each other," Small John says, "because nobody else will." It's bleak and true in equal measure. The Freemasons, meanwhile, have their own brotherhood. You watch them during the midday break, clustered together, sharing bread and cheese and speaking in low tones about things you don't understand. One of them is marking out a template for a complex curved piece, part of a rib vault you'll later learn, and the others are offering suggestions, critiquing the angles, arguing about the best approach. There's no ego in it, or at least less ego than you'd expect. They genuinely want the work to be good because their reputations are all tied together. A failed stone reflects on the whole crew. Guillaume tells a story during lunch, one of those teaching parables that medieval craftsmen loved. "There was a mason in Paris," he begins, "who got ambitious, thought he knew better than his master, started cutting corners, literally shaving off extra material to finish blocks faster, get paid sooner. Cathedral stone for St. Denis, very prestigious. The master mason noticed but said nothing, just watched. Sure enough, when they started assembling the choir, this fool's stones didn't fit. Wrong dimensions, wrong angles. Had to tear out an entire section and start over. You know what happened to him?" Everyone shakes their heads, even though they've probably heard this story before. "Guild revoked his certification. He's cutting millstones now, up north somewhere, manual labor for the rest of his life. Never touch cathedral stone again." Guillaume lets that sink in. The guild protects quality. Quality protects all of us. Remember that. It's propaganda, obviously, designed to keep everyone in line and reinforce the guild's authority. But it's also true that shoddy work can literally kill people. A poorly cut keystone in an arch fails, the whole thing comes down, and suddenly you've got dead masons, dead clergy, and a very angry bishop looking for someone to blame. Standards matter when you're building structures meant to last centuries. You spend the afternoon learning to read stone at a very basic level. Flanders, in a rare talkative mood, shows you how to spot potential problems. "See that?" He points to a slight discoloration running through a section of exposed limestone. "Iron oxide, probably. Means there's been water movement through that crack, deposited minerals. Stone's weaker there. Cut across that and it'll split wrong, guaranteed. You wouldn't have noticed it in a million years, but now that he's pointed it out, it's obvious. A rust-colored streak, barely visible, that signals structural weakness. And this," he knocks on another section with his knuckle, ear close to the stone. "Hear that? Hollow sound? There's a void in there, maybe a fossil cavity, maybe just a gap in the formation. Either way, not usable for anything structural. Good for rubble fill, that's about it." It's like he's reading a language written in stone itself, interpreting tiny clues that tell him what's safe to cut and what's a disaster waiting to happen. By late afternoon, your gang has successfully driven wooden wedges into the sawed channel and, miracle of miracles, the stone has split clean. Several tons of limestone have separated from the quarry face along precisely the line Peter intended, a perfect demonstration of skill over brute force. There's actual applause from nearby workers, because a clean split is something to celebrate. It means days of work haven't been wasted. It means everyone gets paid for this block. Now comes the dressing, the process of turning this rough block into something that matches Guillaume's template. This is where the real skill shows. Peter and Flanders work together, using heavy hammers and steel chisels to knock off the high spots, working their way toward the desired dimensions. It's loud, physical, and requires constant judgment calls. Too aggressive and you crack the stone. Too timid and you'll be here next week still pecking away. They work in a rhythm, taking turns, one resting while the other strikes, switching off before exhaustion leads to mistakes. You're on cleanup duty, sweeping away the chips and dust, making sure the working surface stays clear. It's menial work but necessary, and you're starting to understand that even the bottom rung of this hierarchy serves a purpose. Everyone has a role. The system functions because everyone performs their piece, however small. As the sun drops low and Guillaume calls end of day, you notice something interesting. The master mason walks through the quarry one last time, checking on each workstation, offering quiet words to different crews. It's not just inspection, it's leadership. He's making sure morale stays decent, that conflicts get smoothed over, that tomorrow everyone comes back ready to work. Because that's the other part of his job that nobody talks about. Managing personalities, keeping dozens of men with sharp tools and short tempers from turning the quarry into a battleground. You climb out of the pit for the second time, your body marginally less destroyed than yesterday, but your brain considerably more aware of just how far you have to climb to reach anything resembling mastery. The hierarchy isn't just about skill. It's about time, endurance, politics, guild connections, and sheer survival. Most laborers never make it to Freemason. Most Freemasons never become masters. You're looking at a pyramid where the top is vanishingly small and the bottom is littered with the broken bodies of people who tried and failed. But here's the weird part. Some people do make it. Peter might, if he keeps learning and doesn't get killed first. The boy from Toulouse did. Even Guillaume started somewhere near the bottom, probably hauling rubble just like you, probably wondering if his hands would ever stop hurting. The possibility exists, distant and fragile, like a candle flame in a drafty cathedral. And maybe that's enough to make you come back tomorrow. Or maybe you're just too tired to run away. Your third day at the quarry begins with a very medieval solution to a very modern problem. Your hands are destroyed, and you need to keep working anyway. Flanders takes one look at your raw, weeping palms and grunts in sympathy, which, coming from him, is basically a heartfelt expression of solidarity. He disappears for a moment and returns with a small clay pot containing something that smells absolutely vile, like rancid fat mixed with herbs and regret. Goose grease and yarrow, he explains, scooping out a fingerful of the gray-green paste. Stings like hellfire, but it'll keep the dirt out. He's not wrong about the stinging. The moment that concoction hits your open blisters, you understand why medieval people were so comfortable with the concept of purgatory. They'd already experienced it topside. But you grit your teeth, let him slather both palms, and then he wraps them in thin strips of linen that he's apparently been recycling for this exact purpose. Change the wraps every night, he instructs. Wash them in the stream, let them dry. Don't let anyone else use them or you'll get the rot. By the rot, he means infection, which in 1243 is basically a death sentence with extra steps. No antibiotics, no sterilization, just your body's immune system versus whatever medieval bacteria are looking for a new home. Thus protected, you're introduced to the actual tools of the trade, and this is where the reality of medieval technology hits you like a badly aimed hammer. Everything is iron, and not particularly good iron at that. Steel exists, sure, but it's expensive and reserved for cutting edges and special applications. Most of what you're working with is bog-standard wrought iron that's been hammered into shape by a blacksmith who was probably drunk and definitely didn't care about ergonomics. The basic hammer, called a mash hammer or sometimes just a maul, is a chunk of iron weighing anywhere from 4 to 8 pounds. mounted on a wooden handle that's been hand-carved from ash or oak. The handle length varies depending on the job, but the one Peter hands you is about 18 inches long and feels like it was designed for someone with hands the size of dinner plates. The balance is off, the head isn't perfectly centered, and there's a visible crack in the wood near the base that everyone's just ignoring because apparently this is fine, nothing to worry about, definitely won't explode in your face mid-swing. Hit with the face, not the edge, Peter instructs, demonstrating on a piece of scrap stone. Edge hits and you'll mushroom the head, send shrapnel everywhere. Also, you'll look stupid. This is important safety information delivered with the emotional weight of someone describing the weather. The medieval workplace safety manual, as far as you can tell, consists entirely of try not to die and seriously try harder. Then there are the chisels, and oh, what a variety of chisels. You've got point chisels for initial roughing out, which are basically iron spikes with slightly flattened ends. You've got tooth chisels with serrated edges that look like someone tried to make a saw blade but gave up halfway through. You've got flat chisels in various widths for finishing work. And you've got a special chisel called a blister that's apparently perfect for particular types of cuts, but which just looks like a confused crowbar to your untrained eyes. Every single one of these tools has a lifespan measured in hours, not years. The cutting edges dull constantly against limestone, and dull tools are dangerous tools. They skip, they catch, they require more force to work, which means more chances for that force to redirect somewhere unfortunate, like through your hand. So the quarry has a dedicated sharpening station where a couple of workers spend their entire day doing nothing but grinding edges on whetstones, maintaining the arsenal of chisels and points that keep the operation running. Small John shows you the proper way to hold a chisel for basic stone dressing. The chisel goes in your left hand, assuming you're right-handed, which the medieval world strongly encourages you to be, positioned at the angle you want to cut. Your thumb sits behind the chisel, not in front, because if you miss with the hammer, you'd really prefer to hit iron rather than your own digit. The hammer comes down in a controlled arc, striking the chisel head with enough force to chip stone, but not so much force that the chisel punches through and buries itself unpredictably. Rhythm is everything, Small John says, and then demonstrates a steady tap-tap-tap pattern that sounds almost musical. Hit, reposition the chisel, hit, reposition. It looks easy when he does it. When you try, your first swing glances off the chisel head completely, the hammer rebounds wildly, and you nearly take out your own kneecap. Your second attempt is better but sends the chisel skittering across the stone surface in a screech of metal on limestone that makes everyone within 20 feet wince. Your third attempt actually chips off a small flake of stone, which feels like a disproportionate victory worthy of a parade. You'll get it, Small John says encouragingly. Only took me 3 months before I stopped hitting my own fingers every day. Now it's only once a week. He is not joking. The saws deserve special mention because they're simultaneously impressive and terrifying. The large two-man saws used for cutting blocks are about as sophisticated as medieval technology gets in this context. They're iron blades, yes, but the teeth aren't designed to cut. They're designed to abrade. Remember that sand and water slurry from yesterday? That's the actual cutting mechanism. The saw just provides a way to keep fresh abrasive moving through the cut, grinding away at the stone grain by grain. A master sawyer, and yes, that's a specialized position with its own skill set, can read the stone through the saw blade. He feels when the blade starts to bind, indicating a harder pocket of stone or a change in the grain. He adjusts the angle infinitesimally, keeps the pressure consistent, maintains the rhythm with his partner on the other end of the saw. It's exhausting work that destroys your shoulders and back, and the sawyers have a reputation for being able to drink everyone else under the table because they've built up the kind of core strength that makes medieval Alish tremble in fear. But here's the thing about these iron tools. They break. Constantly. Catastrophically. Without warning. You're watching a journeyman named Thomas dress a block when it happens. He's working with a nice rhythm, making good progress, probably thinking about what's for dinner, and then his chisel just shatters. The iron fractures right at the business end, and suddenly there's a piece of shrapnel spinning through the air like a medieval bullet. It catches Thomas across the cheek, opening a cut that immediately starts pouring blood, and he's lucky, genuinely lucky, that it didn't hit his eye or throat. Everyone stops working. Guillaume appears as if summoned, takes one look at the broken chisel and Thomas's bleeding face, and just nods. "Get to the barber," he tells Thomas. "Today's pay still counts." This is unusually generous, suggesting that tool failures are common enough that penalizing workers for them would mean nobody could afford to work here. Thomas wraps a rag around his face and heads off to find the barber surgeon, who will probably pour some wine on it, maybe sprinkle some powdered herbs that may or may not be medicinal, and call it good. The broken chisel gets tossed in a scrap pile. Later, it'll go back to the blacksmith for reforging. Nothing is wasted in the medieval economy. That iron represents real value, even broken. The smith will heat it, hammer it back into shape, retemper the edge, and send it back into service where it will eventually break again. It's the circle of life, medieval industrial edition. Flanders explains that tool quality varies wildly depending on the iron source and the smith's skill. "Good Swedish iron, that'll hold an edge all day," he says wistfully, like he's describing a lover. "Stuff we get from the local forge? Lucky if it lasts till lunch." Iron is made from bog or in this region, smelted in small furnaces that produce inconsistent results. Sometimes you get decent iron with relatively low impurities. Sometimes you get what's technically iron but is actually mostly slag and hope. The tools made from the latter category are the ones that explode. There's also the problem of handles. Remember that crack in your hammer handle? That's not cosmetic. Wood dries out, gets stressed by repeated impacts, develops fractures. A hammer head that comes loose mid-swing becomes a projectile that obeys no laws except physics, and physics is not your friend in these situations. Peter shows you the trick of soaking handles in water overnight to swell the wood, tightening the fit temporarily, but it's a band-aid on a fundamental problem. These tools are not built to last, and everyone just accepts that as normal. The wedges used for splitting stone are slightly more reliable, mostly because they're just big chunks of iron or hardwood driven into rock. Hard to mess that up, though people certainly try. You watch a team on the far side of the quarry attempting to split a large block using wooden wedges that they're systematically soaking with water. The principle is sound. Wet wood expands, exerting pressure on the stone, eventually forcing a split, but the execution is comedy gold. One of the wedges pops out like a champagne cork, sailing a good 15 feet before landing in someone's lunch basket. The rock remains stubbornly unsplit, mocking their efforts. Iron wedges are better but more expensive, Guillaume explains, wandering over to supervise and probably judge. Wood is cheap. Failure is also cheap. Try again. This is apparently an acceptable loss rate in his mind. Then there are the specialty tools that only the Freemasons use, and these are guarded like holy relics. Calipers for measuring precise dimensions, made from brass if you're lucky, iron if you're not. Wooden templates that have been carefully shaped to match architectural specifications, with edges worn smooth from years of use. Plumb lines and levels that are surprisingly sophisticated, weighted strings and water-filled troughs that help ensure walls are actually vertical and floors actually horizontal, revolutionary concepts that apparently need special tools to achieve. The Freemasons also have something called a banker, which is just a sturdy workbench at a comfortable height, but the comfort is the luxury here. They get to do their detailed carving standing up, not crouched over a rock in the quarry pit like some sort of medieval gremlin. The bankers are positioned near the quarry but under shade structures, because direct sunlight on white limestone creates a glare that'll blind you faster than staring at a solar eclipse, and the master masons prefer their expensive craftsmen retain their eyesight. You're helping to move a dressed block to one of these banker stations when you get your first real look at precision stonemasonry in action. A Freemason named Jean is working on a voussoir, one of the wedge-shaped stones that forms an arch. He's using a tooth chisel to texture the surface in absolutely parallel lines, each stroke precisely spaced, creating a finish that's somehow both rough and refined. The concentration on his face is absolute. This isn't just carving, it's meditation. One wrong strike, one moment of inattention, and days of work become expensive rubble. 30 years I've been cutting stone, Jean says without looking up, somehow aware you're watching. And I still learn something new every week. Stone teaches you if you listen. Problem is, most people don't survive the lessons long enough to benefit. He punctuates this cheerful observation with another perfect strike of his hammer, sending a precise chip of limestone spinning away. The tool that impresses you most, though, is the simple wooden square, two pieces of wood joined at a perfect 90-degree angle. Except it's not simple at all, because ensuring that angle is exactly 90 degrees without modern measuring equipment is actually black magic. The squares are made by specialized craftsmen, checked against master squares, and treated with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Because if your square is off by even a single degree, every cut you make will compound that error, and suddenly your carefully carved archstones don't fit together and the whole structure is compromised. Historians still argue whether medieval masons used mathematical formulas or relied purely on traditional geometric methods and practical experience. The answer seems to be both, plus a healthy dose of trade secrets we're not writing down because job security. The master masons definitely understood geometry at a level that would surprise most modern people. They could calculate the curves of pointed arches, figure out buttress placement to counteract lateral forces, design complex vaulting patterns, all without calculus or computer modeling. Just knowledge passed down through generations, refined through trial and error, and protected by guild monopolies. By afternoon, you're allowed to try some actual stone dressing under heavy supervision. Peter gives you a small block of limestone, already roughly shaped, and a well-worn flat chisel. Just try to flatten this surface, he instructs. Don't rush. Feel the stone. You position the chisel, raise the hammer, and strike. The chip that comes off is roughly the size of a pea and completely wrong-shaped. You try again. Another chip slightly better. By the 20th attempt, your arm is getting tired and you've created a surface that looks like the moon during a particularly bad crater outbreak. All divots and ridges and nothing remotely flat. Better than yesterday. Peter lies kindly, taking the hammer from your trembling hand. Then he shows you what 30 seconds of skilled work looks like, rapidly dressing the same surface into something actually flat. His strike so controlled and precise that the chips fly off in a consistent size and the surface smooths out like he's erasing mistakes from reality itself. Practice, he says, handing the tools back. You'll get there, or you won't and you'll haul baskets forever. Either way, we need both types of people. Is probably the most honest assessment of your prospects you're going to get. By your 4th day, you're starting to understand that stone isn't just stone. It's a language, a puzzle, a temperamental partner that will absolutely murder you if you misread its signals. Guillaume gathers the crew at dawn for what he calls reading practice, which sounds educational until you realize it's actually learn this or die horribly practice. He's brought a selection of limestone samples from different parts of the quarry, each one looking basically identical to your untrained eyes, which is precisely the problem. This, Guillaume says, holding up a chunk of pale gray limestone, will kill you if you're stupid about it. He tosses it to Peter, who catches it and immediately runs his thumb along one edge, squinting at something you can't see. Tell them what you feel. Peter rotates the stone, holds it up to catch the early light, and points to a barely visible line running diagonally across the surface. Bed plane runs this way, about 20 degrees off horizontal. There's a secondary fracture here. He traces another invisible line, probably from freeze-thaw cycles before we quarried it. Cut perpendicular to the bed and it'll split clean. Cut parallel and you might get lucky, or you might end up with 3 pieces instead of 1. You squint at the rock. You still can't see what he's talking about. Guillaume takes the stone back and actually breaks it with a well-placed hammer blow, splitting it precisely along that invisible line Peter identified. The interior reveals a subtle color change, a slight variation in crystal structure that explains the weakness. The stone tells you everything, Guillaume says, if you bother to listen. Problem is, most of you are deaf. He's not wrong. You've been treating limestone like it's uniform material, the same all the way through, but that's catastrophically incorrect. Limestone forms in layers, those beds Peter keeps mentioning, deposited over millions of years in ancient seas. Each layer has slightly different properties depending on what was in the water when it formed, how much pressure it experienced, how it was subsequently deformed by geological forces you can't even pronounce. The result is stone that has a grain, directionality, natural weak points, and internal stresses that aren't visible until you start cutting. See this color variation? Guillaume points to a section of quarry face where the limestone shifts from cream to slightly pink. Iron content, usually, makes the stone harder but more brittle. You hit it wrong and it shatters. You hit it right and it'll outlast the cathedral it's building. He makes it sound simple, which it absolutely isn't. Flanders takes over the lesson, because apparently today is Terrify the New Workers Day. He shows you a chunk of limestone riddled with tiny holes, like stone Swiss cheese. Fossil cavities, he explains. This whole area used to be a tropical sea millions of years back. Little sea creatures died, left their shells, created these voids. Stone like this is worthless for building, too weak, too unpredictable. But you don't always see the cavities until you cut into the block. He demonstrates by splitting a seemingly solid piece of stone, revealing a hollow chamber in the center that could have housed a small snail. Spend 3 days cutting a block, get it perfectly dressed, then discover the middle is rotten. That's a bad week. You're beginning to understand why master masons command such high wages. This isn't just physical labor, it's geology, engineering, and fortune-telling all rolled into one profession. You need to look at raw stone and predict how it will behave when you cut it, how it will respond to stress once it's incorporated into a building, whether it will last 50 years or 500. And you need to make these predictions with nothing but experience and intuition, because nobody's invented X-ray technology yet and won't for about 700 years. Small John has his own horror story. Last year, we cut this beautiful block, perfect dimensions, no visible flaws. Got it dressed, loaded on the cart, sent it 20 miles to the cathedral site. They went to set it in the wall and it just collapsed, just fell apart into gravel. Turned out there was a clay seam running through the middle, invisible from the outside, that destabilized the whole thing once they removed the surrounding pressure. He shakes his head at the memory. We didn't get paid for that one. Master Mason nearly lost the contract. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps Guillaume up at night, delivering stone that fails after installation. The financial penalty is severe, but the reputational damage is worse. Word gets around in the Mason community. Suddenly, other cathedral chapters are hesitant to hire you. Your journeymen start getting better offers elsewhere. The whole operation can collapse faster than poorly quarried limestone. So Guillaume teaches reading stone like it's holy scripture because in a very real sense it is. He shows you how to tap the surface with a hammer and listen to the tone. A clear ring means solid stone. A dull thud suggests internal voids or fractures. He demonstrates wetting the surface to reveal hairline cracks that disappear when dry, capillary action pulling water into the tiniest fissures and making them visible. He even has you smell different stones, which seems insane until you realize that certain types of inclusions, clay, organic matter, sulfur compounds, have distinctive odors when freshly cut. This smells like rotten eggs, you observe, holding a piece near your nose and immediately regretting it. Pyrite inclusions, Guillaume confirms. Iron sulfide makes the stone unstable, especially in wet conditions. Absolutely unusable for anything except fill. Good nose. This might be the first compliment he's ever given you, and it's about your ability to identify stone by smell. Your career has taken some turns. The practical portion of the lesson involves examining an active quarry face where the next cuts will be made. Guillaume chalks potential cut lines, then quizzes the group on what they see. Peter, this line here, is it good? Peter studies it, runs his hand along the proposed cut, then shakes his head. Crosses 2 different beds, sir. Upper bed looks sound, but lower bed has that brownish discoloration, probably iron or manganese. They'll weather at different rates, create weakness at the boundary. Correct. Flanders, what about this section? Flanders examines it for a solid minute before answering. Bed planes run true, color is consistent, tap test sounds good. But I don't like that vertical fracture there. Could be nothing, could be the visible part of a larger fault. I'd probe it first. Make sure we're not about to drop a wall of rock on someone. Also correct. This is why you're still alive. Both of you. The vertical fractures Flanders mentioned are particularly nasty because they're often the result of tectonic stress. The quarry sits in an area that was geologically active long ago, and the limestone has memory in the form of fault lines and shear zones. These fractures can be stable for years, right up until the moment you remove the surrounding support, and then physics reasserts itself with fatal enthusiasm. There are stories of quarry faces collapsing unexpectedly, releasing thousands of tons of limestone in an avalanche of stone that buries everything in its path. These stories are not told to scare workers, they're told to keep workers alive. You spend the rest of the morning learning to spot these warning signs. Guillaume points out subtle changes in the bedding angle that indicate folding or buckling of the original rock layers. Flanders shows you how vegetation growing in cracks can signal deeper fractures. Plant roots follow water, water follows cracks, and cracks are where the stone wants to fail. Even Small John contributes, explaining how he's learned to feel vibrations in the rock when other crews are working nearby. If you're cutting and you feel a rumble, stop immediately, he says. Means someone's doing heavy work upslope, and the vibrations can propagate through the beds, destabilize loose sections. Saw a man get buried because he ignored that feeling. The afternoon brings practical application. Your crew is tasked with isolating a new block, which means first examining the exposed quarry face and determining where the beds run true. Peter takes the lead, methodically tapping along the face, listening for changes in tone, marking spots where the sound shifts from clear ring to concerning thud. He finds a section that meets approval, roughly 10 feet wide, 8 feet tall, extending back into the hillside maybe 6 feet. This will be a substantial block, probably destined for foundation work based on the size. But before anyone can start cutting, you need to prove the stone. Guillaume brings out a tool that looks like a long iron spike with a T-shaped handle. It's called a jumper drill or star drill, and its purpose is to bore a test hole into the rock face to check for hidden flaws. Peter positions the drill against the stone and begins the tedious process of drilling. Strike with a hammer, rotate the drill a quarter turn, strike again, rotate, strike, rotate. Each impact drives the drill maybe a millimeter deeper. Each rotation clears the hole and repositions the cutting edge. After about 20 minutes of this rhythmic work, and Peter switched with Flanders twice to rest his arms, they've created a hole maybe 8 inches deep. Peter pulls out the drill and immediately sticks his finger into the hole, scooping out the powdered stone dust, examining its color and consistency. Clean, he announces. No clay, no discoloration, nice uniform grain. Looks good. But Guillaume isn't satisfied with one test hole. Drill here, he orders, marking a spot 3 feet over. And here, another mark. If we're cutting a block this size, I want to know its sound all the way through. So they drill again and again, creating a constellation of test holes across the proposed cut area. Each hole takes 20 to 30 minutes of exhausting work, but each one provides critical information about what's hiding inside the seemingly solid stone. All the tests come back clean, and finally Guillaume gives the nod to proceed. But even now, even with all this testing and preparation, there's no guarantee. Peter makes the first cut with a saw, working slowly, paying attention to how the blade moves through the stone. Resistance feels consistent, he reports to Guillaume, who's watching like a hawk. No sudden binding, no soft spots. You're on water and sand duty again, which gives you a front row seat to the cutting process. You can see the saw blade, just iron, nothing special, but the real work is being done by the quartz sand grinding away at the limestone. The slurry that comes out of the cut is gray and gritty, and Peter occasionally scoops up a handful to examine it, looking for color changes or unexpected particles that might indicate you've hit an inclusion. 3 hours into the cut, disaster nearly strikes. The saw binds suddenly, stopping dead despite Peter and Flanders putting their full weight into it. Everyone freezes. This could mean anything from a hard nodule of chert to a major fault to the beginning of a catastrophic fracture. Guillaume appears instantly, as he always does when something goes wrong, and personally examines the situation. Back it out slowly, he orders. They reverse the saw motion, carefully extracting the blade from the cut. Guillaume peers into the channel, runs his finger along the interior, pulls it out covered in gray dust. He examines it closely, even tastes it, which is apparently a thing expert masons do because why wouldn't you lick rocks for a living? Chert nodule, he finally announces. Small one, maybe fist-sized. The saw hit it and stopped. We can work around it. Chert is silica, much harder than limestone, and it forms in nodules throughout the stone when the original limestone was still forming. Hit a chert nodule with a saw and you're basically trying to cut flint with an iron blade. Not impossible, but definitely annoying. Guillaume marks a new cut line, angling around where he estimates the nodule sits. This means the block will be slightly smaller than planned, but better smaller and sound than larger and fatally flawed. They start a fresh cut, and this time the saw moves smoothly, no binding, no surprises. The lesson is clear. Even with all the preparation, all the testing, all the expertise, stone can still surprise you. The best you can do is stay alert, respond to warnings, and adjust your plans when the stone demands it. By late afternoon, the cut is complete and wedges are being driven. This is always tense because it's the moment of truth. Will the stone split where you want it to, or will it fracture along some hidden weakness and turn into expensive gravel? Everyone who's not actively working on something critical stops to watch. The wedges go in, iron this time because Guillaume wants the extra control, and the hammering begins. Rhythmic, steady, working from one end of the cut to the other, applying even pressure. You hear it before you see it. A crack that starts as a whisper and builds to a sharp report, like ice breaking on a pond. The stone is moving, separating along the cut line, exactly as planned. There's a collective exhale from the watching workers. The block shifts, tilts slightly, and then settles onto temporary supports that have been positioned in advance. Clean split, no unexpected fractures. A perfect demonstration of skill and stone reading coming together. Guillaume runs his hand along the newly exposed face of the separated block, checking for surprises now that the interior is visible. "Good stone," he mutters, which from him is practically a love poem. "Dress it tomorrow, have it ready for the next transport." You've just witnessed several days of work condensed into one afternoon, all of it predicated on the ability to read stone correctly. Get it wrong and those days are wasted. Get it really wrong and someone dies. The stakes are always this high, every cut, every block, every day. And somehow these men do it year after year, reading an ancient language written in stone, making predictions that balance experience against uncertainty, and mostly getting it right. As you climb out of the quarry that evening, your hands still wrapped in Flanders medicinal linen, your muscles screaming from another day of abuse, you realize something unsettling. You're starting to see what they see. That discoloration Guillaume pointed out this morning, you can spot it now on other sections of Quarry face. The way Peter taps the stone and listens, you tried it during a break and actually heard the difference between solid and questionable. You're learning the language, absorbing it almost unconsciously, and part of you wonders if this is how it starts. How apprentices become journeymen. How people who plan to work here for a month end up staying for 30 years. The stone teaches you, Jean said, and apparently, whether you want it to or not, you're becoming a student. Day 5 begins with a demonstration of medieval engineering that's equal parts impressive and absolutely horrifying. A massive block, probably 8 tons of limestone, already dressed to rough dimensions, needs to be moved from the quarry floor up to ground level where it can be loaded onto a cart. In a modern world, you'd use a crane, a forklift, maybe a truck with a hydraulic lift. In 1243, you've got rope, wood, desperate hope, and what Guillaume cheerfully calls the wisdom of the ancients, which is really just a fancy way of saying, we've been doing this long enough that most of the deadly mistakes have already killed previous generations. The device they're using is called a Lewis, and it's genuinely clever in a way that makes you respect medieval engineers while simultaneously wanting to run away very fast. It's essentially a 3-piece iron wedge system that gets inserted into a specially cut tapered hole in the top of the stone block. The outer 2 pieces spread apart when you lift, gripping the sides of the hole, creating a connection point that, in theory, can support the entire weight of the stone. In practice, it's a connection point that can support the weight right up until the moment it catastrophically fails and drops several tons of rock on whoever's standing underneath. "Stand back," Guillaume orders, which is the medieval safety briefing in its entirety. A crew of 8 men positions themselves around a wooden crane, and I use the term crane loosely here because it's basically a massive timber frame with a windlass and a lot of rope that looks like it's been spliced together from smaller sections because apparently nobody makes rope long enough for this nonsense. The Lewis is already set in the stone block, iron pieces wedged tight into their tapered socket. The foreman, a grizzled veteran named Hugh who's missing 3 fingers from his left hand, which tells you everything you need to know about the safety record of this operation, checks the Lewis connection one more time, tugging on it, testing the seating. "Looks good," he announces, which is not nearly as reassuring as he seems to think it is. The windlass begins to turn. The rope goes taut. You can actually hear the fibers creaking as they take the load, individual strands stretching and complaining under the strain. The stone shifts, tilts, and then, miracle of miracles, lifts clear of the ground. It's hanging there, 8 tons of limestone suspended by rope and iron and prayers, swinging slightly in a way that makes everyone in a 20-foot radius suddenly very interested in being somewhere else. Walk it forward. Hugh commands, and the crew begins moving the crane's base, shuffling it forward in tiny increments while the stone dangles overhead like the world's most dangerous piñata. Every step is calculated, every shift in weight carefully managed, because if that block starts swinging with momentum, it could easily take out the crane, the crew, and anyone unlucky enough to be in the impact zone. You watch this process for 45 minutes of controlled terror, until the stone is finally positioned over a heavy wooden sledge at ground level. The windlass reverses, lowering the block inch by inch, and when it finally settles onto the sledge with a solid thunk, the collective sigh of relief is audible. See, Guillaume says to you like this proves something. Simple, right? Simple in the way that juggling chainsaws while blindfolded is simple, technically possible, but you're one mistake away from disaster. But the Lewis is actually one of the safer lifting methods, which tells you something about the alternatives. For smaller stones, workers just use rope slings wrapped directly around the block, which works fine until the rope frays through and suddenly you're playing dodgeball with limestone. For irregular pieces that don't have convenient lifting points, there's a technique involving a network of ropes and a wooden frame that distributes the load, except when the frame splits under stress and becomes a shower of splinters and falling rock. The real nightmare fuel is the A-frame crane, which you see operating on the far side of the quarry. It's exactly what it sounds like. 2 massive timbers leaned against each other in an A shape, with a pulley at the apex and a whole lot of optimism holding the structure together. The thing is maybe 20 feet tall, and there's a 2-ton block currently hanging from it, being maneuvered into position by 6 workers pulling on guide ropes like they're flying a very heavy, very dangerous kite. That A-frame's been here 12 years. Small John mentions casually, following your horrified gaze. Original timbers, never replaced. Master says oak that old is stronger than new wood. All the sap dried out. He pauses. Of course, he said the same thing about the crane that collapsed 3 years ago and killed 2 men, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. The physics of these lifting operations is actually sound. Leverage, mechanical advantage, distribution of forces, but the margin for error is terrifyingly slim. Every rope has a breaking strength, every wooden beam has a load limit, every connection point is a potential failure mode. And you're working with materials that aren't standardized, aren't tested, aren't certified by any authority except, well, it hasn't broken yet. Rope is a particular concern. Medieval rope is made from hemp fibers twisted together, and while good rope is remarkably strong, good rope is not always what you get. Rope degrades from exposure to sun and moisture, weakens when it gets wet, which is constantly, because remember that water and sand cutting slurry, and develops invisible internal damage from repeated stress. There's no way to X-ray a rope and see which fibers are about to fail. You just use it until it breaks, hope you're not underneath anything when that happens, and replace it with new rope that will eventually break in its own time. Guillaume actually has a system for retiring rope, which is more than most quarries bother with. He marks new rope with a colored thread, and once it's been in service for a year, or if it shows visible damage, it gets demoted from lifting duty to less critical applications like guidelines or securing loads for transport. Eventually it becomes so degraded that even Guillaume won't trust it, and then it gets cut up for smaller tasks or just burned. The whole life cycle of a rope, from new and trustworthy to suspiciously frayed to actively dangerous, plays out over maybe 18 months. See that rope there? Flanders points to one section of the crane's main lifting line. It's darker than the rest, slightly thicker, clearly a splice where 2 pieces have been joined together. That splice is the weakest point in the whole system. Rope breaks, it'll break there. We know this. We accept this. We just make sure nobody's underneath when we're lifting. This is medieval risk management in a nutshell. Identify the danger, acknowledge you can't eliminate it, and just try to be somewhere else when probability catches up with you. The windlass mechanism itself is a marvel of simple machines working together. It's essentially a large wooden drum mounted horizontally, with handles extending out like spokes on a wheel. Workers grab the handles and walk in a circle, rotating the drum, which winds up the rope and lifts the load. The mechanical advantage means that several men can lift weights they couldn't possibly budge with just muscle power. The trade-off is that it's slow, agonizingly slow, and if something goes wrong, there's no quick release, no emergency brake. You're committed to the lift, and you better hope your math was correct about how much weight that system can handle. There's a ratchet mechanism, a wooden pawl that drops into notches cut into the windlass drum, that prevents the whole thing from spinning backward if the crew loses their grip. This is brilliant engineering that saved countless lives and probably a few careers. But the pawl itself is just a chunk of hardwood, and wood wears down. The notches get smoother, the pawl gets shorter, and eventually you reach a point where it might hold or it might slip, and the only way to find out is to put it under load and see what happens. Lost a pawl last summer. Hugh mentions, wandering over to watch your crew work. Middle of a lift, stone probably 6 tons. Heard this crack and the whole windlass started spinning backward. Boys on the handles got thrown off. Stone dropped about 15 feet before we could stop it. Shattered into a dozen pieces. Master was not pleased. He says this with the same tone you'd use to describe a mildly interesting weather event, not a mechanical failure that could easily have killed everyone involved. The splicing and knot work would impress any modern sailor. These quarrymen can tie knots that'll hold under incredible loads, create rope assemblies that distribute stress evenly across multiple strands, and somehow do it all with cold stiffened fingers and rope that's coated in limestone dust. The primary knot for attaching lifting rope to the Lewis is called a Beckett hitch, though they just call it the lift knot, and it's tied in a specific way that allows the load to seat properly while maintaining the rope's full strength. Tie it wrong and the rope can slip or weaken at the knot. Tie it right and it'll hold loads that seem impossible for plant fiber. But here's what really gets you. They're doing all this without any real understanding of tensile strength, stress analysis, or failure modes. Nobody's calculated the exact breaking point of the rope or modeled the forces on the crane structure. They're working purely from experience. This thickness of rope has held this weight before, therefore it should hold it again. This timber configuration has worked for 12 years, therefore it's probably good for another lift. It's empirical engineering, refined through generations of trial and error, where error usually means someone died. Around midday, you witness what happens when prayer and physics have a disagreement. A different crew is using a simple pulley system to raise a medium-sized block, maybe 3 tons, and everything seems fine until it isn't. There's a sound like a gunshot, which you've learned is never a good sound in a quarry, and suddenly the rope has parted. Not at a splice, not at a knot, just a catastrophic failure somewhere in the middle where the fibers gave up all at once. The block drops maybe 8 feet before hitting the quarry floor, and the impact is spectacular. The stone doesn't shatter cleanly, it sort of explodes, sending fragments in all directions. One chunk the size of your fist whistles past your head close enough that you feel the breeze. The workers who were on the pulley rope get whipped by the sudden release of tension, and one man goes down hard, clutching his shoulder where the rope burned across him on its way to failing. Guillaume arrives at a run, surveys the damage, and his face goes through several interesting expressions. "Anyone dead?" he calls out. "No, sir," comes the reply. "Anyone bleeding from somewhere they shouldn't be?" "Thomas here thinks he dislocated his shoulder, sir." Guillaume nods, processing this. "Get him to the barber. Everyone else, clean up this mess. That block's rubble now. Write it off." He turns to Hugh. "That rope was marked for replacement when?" 2 months ago, sir. But we've been short on supplies. Couldn't get new rope in time. Thought we could squeeze a bit more use out of it." Guillaume's expression suggests that squeezing more use out of critical safety equipment is not his preferred operational strategy. But he just sighs. "Next time it's marked for replacement, we replace it. I don't care if we have to stop work for a week." "Understood." "Yes, sir." This is probably the most robust safety culture you're going to see in medieval industry, and it's still basically try not to use equipment that's obviously about to kill someone. The bar is underground. The afternoon involves moving that first block, the one that was successfully lifted, onto a transport cart. The cart itself is an engineering challenge, a heavy wooden platform mounted on solid wooden wheels, each wheel carved from a single massive tree trunk because apparently nobody's invented spokes yet in this part of the world. The axles are iron reinforced, greased with tallow, and still squeal like dying animals when the cart moves. Getting an 8-ton block onto the cart requires a ramp, which means building a temporary earthen ramp, which means someone, spoiler alert, it's you and Small John, gets to spend 2 hours hauling dirt and rocks to create an inclined plane. You're essentially doing Bronze Age earth moving with medieval tools, and your back has opinions about this, all of them negative. Once the ramp is built, the block gets positioned on a rolling platform, basically logs acting as rollers, a technique that's been used since the pyramids and still works because physics hasn't changed in 5,000 years. The crew muscles the stone up the ramp inch by inch, repositioning rollers as they get left behind, and if this sounds exhausting, that's because it absolutely is. 40 minutes of coordinated pushing, pulling, levering, and occasionally swearing, and finally the block is on the cart, secured with rope, ready for transport. 12 miles to the cathedral, Hugh announces. Should take 4 days with the ox team, assuming the roads are dry and we don't break an axle. 12 miles in 4 days. That's 3 miles a day, which tells you everything about the state of medieval roads and the efficiency of ox-powered transport. But there's no alternative. This is how stone moves from quarry to building site. Slowly, painfully, with frequent stops to repair equipment and pray that nothing breaks catastrophically. You watch the cart depart, creaking and groaning under its load, and realize that you've been part of a supply chain that's moving stone from deep in the earth to positions high in a cathedral wall, all using muscle power, animal power, and mechanical systems that would give a modern safety inspector a fatal heart attack. And somehow, despite everything, it works. Not efficiently, not safely by modern standards, but it works. Cathedrals get built. Castles rise. The medieval world constructs monuments that'll outlast empires, all moved into place by rope and prayer. The Lewis comes out of the departed stone block, and Guillaume personally inspects it for damage. Still good, he announces, running his fingers over the iron surfaces, checking for cracks or deformation. This single Lewis will be used hundreds of times, lifting block after block, until eventually the metal fatigues and fails and becomes a cautionary tale for the next generation. As evening approaches, you're helping to coil rope. Proper coiling prevents kinks and tangles, which can weaken the fibers, and Flanders shares one more cheerful story. Saw a crane topple once years back, overloaded it top-heavy, and when they tried to swing the load, the whole structure just tipped over. Came down like a felled tree, crushed the windlass crew, pinned 2 men under the beam. Took us 3 hours to dig them out. One survived, the other didn't. Master Mason in charge of that operation never worked again. Not because the guild punished him, he just couldn't. Lost his nerve. Last I heard he was making roof tiles. Simple work, nothing that could fall on anyone. You're beginning to understand that every experienced mason at this quarry is a survivor. They've seen colleagues die, watched equipment fail, been present for disasters that by all rights should have killed them too. They keep working not because they're brave or foolish, but because this is what they know, what they're trained for, and in a medieval economy, you don't have the luxury of career changes based on trauma. The ropes are coiled, the tools are stored, and tomorrow you'll start the whole process again. Reading stone, cutting carefully, lifting nervously, moving impossibly heavy objects with impossible fragile equipment, and hoping that probability continues to favor your survival. Welcome to medieval logistics, where everything's held together with rope and optimism, and somehow it's enough. By the end of your first week, you've developed a cough. Not a little throat-clearing cough, but a deep, rattling hack that starts somewhere in your chest and claws its way up your throat, leaving you bent over and gasping. When you spit, and everyone spits constantly here, it comes out gray, sometimes with darker flecks that might be blood or might just be concentrated stone dust. You mention this to Flanders, hoping for some medieval remedy, maybe more of that foul-smelling paste. He just shrugs. That's the stone getting into you, he says matter-of-factly. Happens to everyone. Some men last 20 years, some last 5. Depends on your lungs, I suppose. Old Bernard over there. He points to a mason you've seen around. Maybe 50 years old, but moving like 70. He's been breathing this dust for 35 years. can barely walk up a hill anymore without stopping to catch his breath. But he's still the best finish carver we have, so he keeps working. Old Bernard, as if summoned by the mention of his name, chooses that exact moment to have a coughing fit that sounds like it's going to turn him inside out. He doubles over, hand against the quarry wall for support, and coughs for a solid minute while everyone else just continues working because this is completely normal. When he finally straightens up, there's blood on his lips that he wipes away with a dust-covered hand, smearing it into a grotesque mask. Then he picks up his chisel and goes back to carving decorative molding like nothing happened. Will I end up like that? You ask, and immediately regret the question because you already know the answer. If you're lucky enough to live that long, Flanders replies. Most men don't make it to 50 in this work. Accidents, mostly. But the ones who avoid the falling rocks and broken ropes? Yeah, the dust gets them eventually. This is silicosis in the medieval world, though they don't have a name for it. They just call it stone lung or the mason's cough, and they accept it as an inevitable consequence of the profession the same way sailors accept the risk of drowning and soldiers accept the risk of getting stabbed. The limestone dust you're breathing, calcium carbonate particles so fine they're invisible in the air, settles deep into your lungs where your body can't expel it. Over time, this triggers inflammation, scarring, and progressive loss of lung function. In really unlucky cases, the combination of stone dust and other environmental factors can trigger something even worse, though medieval medicine isn't advanced enough to distinguish between different types of respiratory disease. You just cough until you can't anymore, and then you die. The dust is absolutely everywhere. It coats every surface in the quarry, turns everyone's hair gray regardless of actual age, and creates a haze in the air on dry days that makes the whole operation look like it's happening inside a cloud. When the wind picks up, mini dust devils form, swirling columns of powdered limestone that sting your eyes and coat your teeth. You've learned to keep your mouth closed as much as possible, but you still need to breathe, and every breath is pulling in particles. The masons have various strategies for managing this, none of them particularly effective. Some tie cloth across their faces, creating a barrier that filters out the largest particles but does nothing about the fine dust. The cloth itself becomes saturated with limestone powder within an hour, turning into a rigid mask that's probably creating more problems than it solves. Other workers smear grease under their noses, claiming it traps dust particles before they can be inhaled, which might help marginally, but mostly just makes everyone look like they've been eating butter straight from the churn. Peter advocates for wet cutting, which means keeping the stone damp while you work to prevent dust from becoming airborne. This actually does help. The water binds the dust particles, keeps them heavy and grounded, but it's not practical for all operations. You can't wet cut while you're doing finish carving because the water obscures the detail work. You can't keep the entire quarry face wet all day because you don't have that much water. So it becomes a compromise. Wet when you can, accept the dust when you can't. The water itself comes from a spring about a quarter-mile away, carried in wooden buckets by whoever's lowest in the hierarchy on any given day. That's frequently you. The path from spring to quarry is worn smooth by years of foot traffic, and you make this journey maybe 20 times a day, hauling buckets that slosh and spill and leave you damp and chilled. In summer, this might be refreshing. In the cool spring weather, it's just miserable. You're making one of these water runs when you encounter the quarry's dedicated water carrier, a boy of maybe 12 named Robin who's been doing this job since he was 8. His job is literally just carrying water all day, every day. He's developed shoulders like a young ox and a 1,000-yard stare that suggests he's contemplating the existential horror of his situation but lacks the vocabulary to express it. Gets easier, he tells you, which is clearly a lie. After the first year, you stop noticing the weight. What about the dust? You ask, because Robin's cough is nearly as bad as old Bernard's, despite his age. Oh, you never stop noticing that, he says cheerfully, and then demonstrates with a coughing fit that brings up gray phlegm he spits into the dirt without breaking stride. At 12 years old, this child is already showing signs of respiratory damage that will probably kill him before he's 40. And everyone just accepts this as the cost of doing business. Historians still argue whether medieval workers understood the connection between occupational exposure and disease, but the evidence suggests they absolutely knew. They just didn't have alternatives. If you're a quarryman, you breathe stone dust. If you're a blacksmith, you breathe metal fumes. If you're a tanner, you work with chemicals that'll probably poison you. Every profession has its hazard, and you either accept the risk or starve. The concept of workplace safety regulations won't be meaningfully developed for another 600 years, so in the meantime, you just cough and hope. The dust affects different people at different rates, which is probably genetic factors at work, though nobody understands that yet. Small John, despite 3 years in the quarry, barely coughs at all. His lungs seem to handle the dust better, or maybe he's just lucky. Peter coughs regularly but not severely, a productive cough that clears his airways and lets him keep working. Flanders coughs like a man who's been smoking 2 packs a day for decades, even though tobacco won't reach Europe for another couple of centuries. The worst cases end up relegated to lighter duty, which in a quarry environment means work that's somehow even more depressing than usual. There's a man named Simon who used to be a skilled hewer until the stone lung got so bad he couldn't swing a hammer without triggering coughing fits. Now he sorts rubble, separating usable fill stone from pure waste, sitting on a rock pile and slowly suffocating while younger men do the work he used to do. He's maybe 45 and looks 70, with skin that's taken on a grayish pallor that might be the dust or might be his body slowly dying from oxygen deprivation. Don't end up like me, Simon wheezes at you one afternoon when you're dumping a basket of rubble near his sorting area. Get out while you still can. This place eats people. You want to ask why he doesn't leave, but you already know the answer. He's got no other skills, no other prospects, probably a family to feed, and the quarry still pays him something for his sorting work. It's not much, maybe a penny a day, a fraction of what active quarrymen make, but it's enough to buy bread and keep a roof overhead. Leaving means destitution, begging, possibly death from starvation instead of suffocation. At least the quarry offers a slow death with occasional wages. The drinking water, ironically, is probably contaminated with stone dust too. It comes from that spring, which is downstream from the quarry, meaning runoff from the operation, water laden with limestone particles, possibly other minerals, flows right into the source you're drinking from. Nobody's invented water filtration, and the concept of waterborne contamination is barely understood. Water looks clear? It's probably fine. Drink up. Some of the workers swear by ale instead of water, claiming it's safer because the brewing process involves boiling, which kills something. They're not wrong about boiling making water safer, though they don't understand why. The ale consumed here is weak, barely alcoholic, more like liquid bread than anything you'd recognize as beer, but it does provide calories and hydration without the obvious particles floating in it that sometimes appear in standing water. You're learning to identify the different types of dust by appearance and behavior. Fresh-cut limestone produces a fine white powder that hangs in the air and coats everything in a pale layer. The dust from the roughing out process, the initial hammer and chisel work that shapes raw blocks, is slightly coarser, more granular, and settles faster. The finishing work creates an almost imperceptibly fine dust that's worse precisely because it's so fine, particles small enough to penetrate deep into lung tissue and stay there. Then there's the dust that comes from particular types of stone with inclusions. Remember that chert nodule your crew encountered? Chert is basically flint, which is silica, and silica dust is significantly more dangerous than limestone dust. Silicosis, real, acute silicosis, develops faster and more severely than the chronic irritation from limestone. The masons know this, or at least know that black stone, chert, flint, creates dust that makes men sick faster than white stone, limestone. They avoid cutting chert when possible, and when it's unavoidable, they take extra precautions like wetting the stone heavily and working in short shifts. But even with precautions, the damage accumulates. Every day, every shift, more dust enters your lungs. Your body's natural defenses, the tiny hairs and mucus in your airways, capture some of it, which you then cough up and spit out. But they don't catch everything. The finest particles make it through, settle into the deepest parts of your lungs, and trigger the slow process of scarring that will eventually make breathing an exhausting effort. Guillaume, despite his authority and presumably better working conditions, coughs as much as anyone. Maybe worse because he's been doing this for 40 years, starting as an apprentice at age 10. He's 50 now, ancient by medieval standards, and every breath sounds like it's being pulled through gravel. But he's the master mason, which means he's survived everything this profession could throw at him. Falling rocks, failed equipment, occupational lung disease, probably a few famines and plagues thrown in for variety. His survival is what gives him authority. He's proof that it's possible to last, even if lasting means coughing blood into your hand and wiping it on your tunic before continuing your inspection rounds. There's a young apprentice, maybe 14, who arrives midweek to train under one of the Freemasons. He's fresh from some village, clean clothes, clear eyes, lungs that work properly. Guillaume takes one look at him and you can see the calculation happening. This boy has maybe 15 to 20 good working years ahead of him before the dust reduces his capacity. Better make sure he learns fast. The boy gets the same talk everyone gets. This work is hard, dangerous, and will probably kill you. But if you survive, you'll have a valuable skill and decent wages. The boy nods eagerly, understanding none of it, because at 14 you're immortal and nothing bad will ever happen to you. Give him 2 weeks and he'll be coughing. Give him 2 years and he'll understand what he's signed up for. Give him 20 years and he'll be old Bernard, if he's very lucky. You spend one afternoon helping to clean out an abandoned section of the quarry, a vein that was exhausted years ago and is now just a cavity in the hillside filled with debris and standing water. The dust here is undisturbed, layered thick on every surface, and when you start moving rocks it rises in clouds that turn the air opaque. You can taste it, feel it coating your mouth and throat, sense it working its way deeper with every breath you can't help but take. Why are we doing this? You ask small John between coughing fits. Master wants to use the space for storing dress blocks. Keep them out of the weather, he explains. So we clear it out, even though it's basically breathing years of concentrated death. He says this without irony or complaint. It's just another task on the list, another day of trading your health for wages. By the time you finish, both of you are coughing so hard you can barely stand upright. Your throat feels raw, your chest aches, and when you spit it's almost black with concentrated dust. Flanders takes one look at you and hands over his flask of ale. Drink, he orders. Won't help much, but at least you'll feel like you're doing something. The ale burns going down your abraded throat, but he's right, it does feel like you're doing something, taking some kind of action against the assault on your lungs, even if that action is ultimately futile. That evening, back in the sleeping quarters you share with a dozen other workers, the night is filled with the symphony of damaged lungs. Coughing, wheezing, the wet sound of men clearing their throats and spitting into corners because chamber pots are for other bodily functions and phlegm just goes wherever. You lie on your straw mattress, feeling your own chest tighten and constrict, and wonder how long you can do this. How long until you're old Bernard, blood on your lips, unable to climb a hill without stopping. How long until you're Simon, relegated to sitting on rubble piles because you can't breathe well enough to work. The answer, you're learning, is measured in thousands of breaths, each one pulling in particles that your body can't expel, each one contributing to the slow accumulation of damage that will eventually make breathing itself a struggle. The dust is patient. It doesn't need to kill you quickly. It just needs to get into your lungs and stay there, grain by grain, breath by breath, until one day your lungs are more scar tissue than functional tissue and you drown in air that your damaged organs can no longer process. Welcome to Occupational Disease Medieval Edition, where the hazards are obvious, the solutions are non-existent, and you either accept slow poisoning or find a different career in an economy that doesn't really offer different careers. Sleep comes eventually, interrupted by your own coughing and everyone else's. A chorus of damaged lungs trying to clear themselves of dust that will be back tomorrow. The accident happens on your 9th day, and you're close enough to see everything in vivid, horrible detail that will probably haunt whatever dreams you manage to have for the rest of your considerably shortened life. It's mid-morning, the sun finally burning through the typical overcast sky, and a crew is working on extracting a particularly large block, maybe 10 tons, destined for a foundation course at some nobleman's castle. They've spent 2 days cutting it free, and now they're in the final stage, driving the iron wedges that will separate it from the bedrock. The foreman is Hugh, remember him? Missing 3 fingers, which should have been a warning sign but apparently wasn't warning enough. He's positioned his crew carefully, wedges placed at precise intervals along the cut line, and the hammering begins in rhythm. You can hear it from across the quarry, the metallic ring of hammer on wedge, the deeper sound of stressed stone beginning to respond. Then the stone does something unexpected. Instead of splitting cleanly along the intended line, it fractures diagonally, following some hidden fault plane that nobody detected despite all the testing and reading and tapping. You hear the crack, loud, sharp, final, and suddenly a several-ton shelf of limestone is separating from the quarry face at completely the wrong angle, pivoting on some unseen fulcrum, and falling directly toward the work crew. Hugh sees it happening and screams a warning, but sound travels slower than falling rock. Two men manage to throw themselves backward, scrambling on hands and knees away from the impact zone. A third man, you don't know his name, a journeyman from somewhere else who's been working here maybe a week, isn't fast enough. The stone shelf catches him across the legs, and the sound of the impact is somehow worse than the sound of the stone fracturing. Not a clean crack, but a wet crunch, bone and flesh compressed between multi-ton stone and bedrock. The man screams. It's not a shout or a yell, but a primal sound. The noise a human body makes when it suddenly understands that its structural integrity has been catastrophically compromised. The scream goes on for maybe 5 seconds, though it feels like an eternity, and then cuts off as he either passes out from shock or his body's pain management system just gives up entirely. Everyone stops working. The entire quarry goes silent except for that terrible scream echoing off stone walls, and then the silence after it stops is somehow worse. Guillaume appears at a sprint from wherever master masons materialize from in emergencies, and he's already assessing the situation as he runs. "How many?" he shouts. "One trapped, sir." Hugh responds, his voice shaking. "Robert's legs under the block." So his name is Robert. Was Robert? You're not sure which tense applies to someone whose legs are currently pulverized under several tons of limestone. Guillaume reaches the accident site and immediately takes command. "We need to lift this now. Get the Lewis. Get the crane positioned. Move." Men scatter to follow orders, grateful to have something to do other than stand and stare at their colleague's broken body. You're part of the crew that runs to fetch the portable A-frame crane, dragging the heavy timber structure across uneven ground while Robert lies pinned and unconscious and probably bleeding out internally. Setting up the crane takes precious minutes. The A-frame has to be positioned just right, close enough to the trapped man to be useful but not so close that the ground's instability, because of course the ground is unstable here, it's a quarry, causes the whole apparatus to topple. The Lewis gets hammered into a pre-existing hole in the stone shelf. Guillaume personally checking the seating because if this fails, if the stone drops again, Robert is absolutely finished. The lifting rope, and you're acutely aware that this is the same type of rope that failed catastrophically just a few days ago, gets attached to the Lewis. Slowly, Guillaume orders the windlass crew. Controlled lift, watch for shifting, and for the love of God, if that rope even looks like it's about to part, everyone run. The windlass turns. The rope goes taut. The stone shifts infinitesimally, and Robert, still unconscious, mercifully, makes a sound that isn't quite human. The shelf lifts maybe 3 inches, enough to see the damage underneath, and several men actually turn away because the sight is that bad. Both of Robert's legs are crushed from mid-thigh down, bent at angles that legs absolutely should not bend, and there's blood. More blood than you'd think a human body could spare, pooling on the quarry floor. "Get him out!" Guillaume barks, and 2 workers slide in under the hovering stone to drag Robert clear. They're risking their own lives in case the lift fails, but there's no other option. They grab Robert under the arms and pull, and his ruined legs drag behind him, leaving a smear of blood. And then he's clear, away from the immediate danger zone, and the windlass crew lowers the stone back down because there's no point in maintaining the lift now. The barber surgeon arrives within 15 minutes, which is impressive response time for medieval emergency medical services. His name is Martin, and he's seen this before. You can tell by the way he doesn't hesitate, doesn't waste time on shock or sympathy, just immediately starts assessing the damage. He looks at Robert's legs for maybe 10 seconds before making his pronouncement. Both legs off, above the knee. Now, before the rot sets in. He's already lost a lot of blood. If we wait, he'll die anyway. This is medieval trauma surgery. Amputate the destroyed parts, cauterize what's left, and pray. There's no anesthetic except alcohol, no antibiotics except prayer, No sterile technique except wiping your tools on a relatively clean rag. Martin sets up his operation right there in the quarry because moving Robert isn't worth the risk. The man's already barely clinging to life. Guillaume makes the call. Do it. We'll hold him down. Robert regains consciousness just as Martin is laying out his saws. Actual carpenter's saws, because specialized surgical instruments aren't really a thing in this time and place. He sees the saws, understands what's about to happen, and starts struggling weakly. No, no, please. His voice is thready, desperate. You want to live? Martin asks bluntly. This is how. You want to die? I can leave right now, save us all the trouble. Robert stops struggling, accepts his fate with the resignation of someone who knows there are no good options, only degrees of awful. For strong men pin him down, shoulders, arms, hips, while Martin ties tourniquets above the crush injuries, tight leather straps that cut off blood flow and will hopefully prevent him from bleeding out during the cutting. Someone give him something to bite on. Martin orders, and Flanders produces a leather strap that gets shoved into Robert's mouth. This is going to hurt worse than anything you've ever experienced. Try not to bite your tongue off. The first cut of the saw produces a scream that you'll hear in your nightmares forever, muffled by the leather strap but still audible across the entire quarry. Robert thrashes against the men holding him down, his body's survival instinct overriding any rational understanding that this is necessary. The saw cuts through flesh and muscle faster than you'd expect, but bone is another matter. Martin has to saw back and forth, while Robert's screams deteriorate into whimpers and then unconsciousness, his body finally doing him the mercy of shutting down. The first leg comes off. Martin drops it aside, just drops it like it's a piece of wood, because what else are you going to do with a crushed leg that's no longer attached to a person, and immediately starts on the second. This one goes faster because Robert's unconscious and not fighting, and within 10 minutes both legs are off, discarded in the dirt, and Martin is cauterizing the stumps with a red-hot iron he's had an assistant heating in a brazier. The smell of burning flesh joins the usual quarry odors of stone, dust, and sweat and fear. Robert doesn't wake up for the cauterization, which is either a blessing or means he's dying. Martin works efficiently, sealing blood vessels, wrapping the stumps in linen that's probably been used before and definitely isn't sterile, and finally sits back. He might live, Martin announces. Probably won't, but might. Keep the wounds clean, change the bandages daily, give him wine if he wakes up. If the stumps turn black or start to smell, well, he's already lost the legs. Can't amputate what's not there anymore. This passes for medical optimism in 1243. Robert gets carried to the sleeping quarters on a stretcher made from a cloak and 2 poles, and work in the quarry resumes after maybe an hour of stoppage. Because the stone doesn't care that Robert just lost his legs. The cathedral still needs blocks. The deadline hasn't changed. Guillaume gives everyone the rest of the day to process what happened, which is generous, but tomorrow you'll be back in the pit, working around the shelf that caused this disaster, because the quarry can't just shut down every time someone gets maimed. That evening, you learn the full scope of quarry accidents from men who've been here long enough to accumulate horror stories. Peter tells you about a stone that split wrong and sent a fragment the size of a dinner plate spinning through the air like a flying guillotine, decapitating a worker clean through. Flanders describes a rope failure that dropped a block onto a man's torso, crushing his entire chest cavity while leaving his head and legs intact. He lived for maybe 30 seconds, conscious and aware, before dying. Small John mentions the fire 3 years back when someone knocked over a brazier and set a wooden crane structure ablaze with 2 men on top of it working the windlass. They either burned or jumped 30 feet to the quarry floor, and the ones who jumped probably made the better choice. These aren't cautionary tales meant to improve safety. They're just stories. The shared history of the quarry, recited with the same casual tone you'd use to discuss weather. Remember when Hugh lost those fingers? Oh yeah, that was a bad week. Workplace accidents aren't aberrations. They're the expected background radiation of quarry life, and everyone has absorbed this reality so completely that they discuss crushed skulls and severed limbs over their evening bread and cheese. The statistical reality, though nobody's actually tracking statistics, is that working in a medieval quarry gives you maybe a 60 to 70% chance of reaching old age without serious injury. That means 3 or 4 workers out of every 10 will experience something catastrophic. Amputation, severe crushing injury, permanent disability, or death. These are not good odds, but they're better than being a soldier in constant warfare and worse than being a farmer who stays away from his own equipment. Guillaume gathers the crew the next morning and delivers a brief speech about vigilance and stone reading and not trusting anything. Robert's accident was preventable, he says bluntly. We didn't read the stone correctly. There was a fault line we missed. Someone failed in their job, and Robert paid the price. He lets this sink in. Every cut you make, every block you lift, every rope you trust. Your life depends on getting it right. Robert's legs are gone because someone was careless. Don't be that someone. It's harsh but accurate. Medieval workplace culture doesn't do grief counseling or trauma support. You process the horror on your own time and come back ready to work, or you don't come back at all. Robert dies 3 days later. Infection probably, though it could have been blood loss or shock or any of the dozen ways a body can fail after major trauma. The barber surgeon shrugs when he reports it. He did his job, the patient didn't survive, that's just how it goes sometimes. The mortality rate for double amputation in this era is probably 80% or higher. Robert was unlucky enough to get crushed and then unlucky enough to die from the treatment. His body gets wrapped in cheap cloth and buried in an unmarked grave near the quarry, joining the other workers who've died here over the years. No elaborate funeral, no monument, just dirt over a hole and back to work. His position gets filled 2 days after he dies. A new journeyman shows up, hears what happened, nods in understanding, and starts working. Because there's always someone desperate enough or brave enough or foolish enough to take the job. The quarry has an endless supply of workers willing to trade their bodies for wages, and medieval labor markets don't really account for workplace deaths except as a brief interruption in productivity. You watch the place where Robert was crushed, now just another section of quarry floor stained darker than the surrounding stone, and you understand something fundamental. The quarry doesn't care about you. The stone doesn't care. Guillaume cares marginally because dead workers are expensive to replace and train, but he's not going to shut down operations because one man got unlucky. This is the calculus of medieval industry, individual lives versus collective productivity, and productivity always wins. The shelf that crushed Robert gets broken up for rubble. Nobody wants to use it for anything important, like there's some superstition about stone that's tasted blood, so it becomes fill material that'll get buried in a wall somewhere. The hidden fault that caused the failure gets discussed in detail. Turns out there was a clay seam nobody detected, running perpendicular to the beds, weakening the stone in a way that wasn't visible from the surface. Now we know to check for that, Guillaume says, and the lesson gets added to the vast corpus of quarry knowledge purchased with blood and broken bodies. You develop a new appreciation for every cut, every lift, every moment when you're standing near suspended stone or working under overhanging rock. The fear never quite leaves you now. Every rope creak makes you flinch. Every unexpected sound from stressed stone sends your heart racing. This is the psychological cost of watching someone get destroyed. You lose your sense of safety, realize that the quarry is actively trying to kill you every single day, and only constant vigilance keeps you alive. Old Bernard, still coughing, still carving, offers his perspective. Lost count of how many men I've seen die here. Falls, crushed, cut by flying stone, infection from minor wounds. You stop counting after a while. Just accept that some days you go home, some days you don't. That's the job. That's the job. Not that's an unfortunate aspect of the job, or that's a risk we work to minimize. Just that's the job, stated as flatly as describing the color of stone. Medieval occupational fatalism at its finest. The quarry continues operating, stone continues moving, cathedrals continue rising, and somewhere in an unmarked grave, Robert's remains begin their slow return to the earth he spent his life excavating. The cycle continues, indifferent to individual tragedy, grinding forward with the inexorable momentum of an economy that needs stone and doesn't particularly care how many bodies it takes to produce it. After Robert's death, you'd expect everyone to quit, to wake up and realize this job isn't worth losing your legs or your life or your lungs. But here's the strange thing, nobody leaves. In fact, the day after the funeral, if you can call dumping a wrapped body in a hole a funeral, everyone shows up for work exactly as before, including you, and you start to understand why people stay in a profession that's actively trying to kill them. Why men return day after day to breathe dust and risk death for wages that barely keep them fed. The first reason is brutally simple: you need to eat. In medieval Europe, if you're not nobility or clergy, you work or you starve. There's no unemployment insurance, no social safety net, no government assistance. The quarry pays daily wages, typically 3 to 4 pence for laborers like you, up to 8 or 10 pence for skilled masons, and that money is the difference between having bread tonight or begging for scraps. Most workers are living hand to mouth, spending their wages on food, lodging, and maybe cheap ale, with nothing left over for savings. Miss a week of work and you're genuinely at risk of starvation. Why don't you find different work? You ask Small John one morning, genuinely curious about why a strong young man would choose this particular form of slow death. He looks at you like you've asked why he doesn't just fly to the moon. And do what? Farm work pays even less and is just as dangerous. Ever seen a man gored by an ox? Soldiering? That's a quick death instead of a slow one. Apprentice to a craft guild? Need money to pay the apprenticeship fee, which I don't have. He gestures at the quarry. This pays cash money, every day. No questions asked about where I came from or who my father was. You show up, you work, you get paid. That's worth something. He's not wrong. The quarry is one of the few places in medieval society where merit, or at least the ability to survive, matters more than birth or connections. Guillaume doesn't care if you're the bastard son of a peasant or a failed merchant's apprentice. Can you lift rocks? Can you follow instructions? Can you avoid getting killed long enough to be useful? Congratulations, you have employment. Peter offers another perspective during the lunch break, sitting on a dressed block and eating bread that's more dust than wheat. I could leave, he admits. I've got skills now, 3 years of learning. I could probably apprentice properly to a Freemason in a city somewhere, work on better projects for better pay. But that would mean leaving, finding a master willing to take me, probably working for reduced wages during the training period. Here, I know the crew, I know Guillaume values my work, and I'm building toward something. Building toward what? You ask, because from where you're sitting, he's building toward the same chronic cough and inevitable injury as everyone else. Mastery, he says simply. If I stay, keep learning, survive long enough, I could be a master mason myself someday. Own my own operation, hire my own crew, take contracts directly from cathedral chapters. That's real money, enough to buy property, marry well, maybe send a son to university. My father was a tenant farmer who never owned anything in his life. I could die here, sure, but I could also become someone who matters. That possibility is worth the risk. This is the medieval dream. Upward mobility through a rigid class system, achieved not by birth but by surviving long enough to master a valuable skill. It's a lottery where the tickets cost your health and possibly your life, but the potential prize is genuine economic advancement. And for people like Peter, born at the bottom of the social hierarchy with no inheritance and no connections, it's one of the few lottery tickets available. Flanders, unsurprisingly, has a more cynical take. I stay because I'm too old to start over, he says flatly. I'm 48. I've been cutting stones since I was 12. What else am I going to do? My lungs are half scar tissue. My back's destroyed. My hands shake from nerve damage. No other trade would have me. So I work here until I can't anymore. And then, he trails off with a shrug that suggests he's made peace with whatever, and then entails. But there's something else too, something harder to articulate. Pride. These men take genuine satisfaction in their work, in the physical reality of creating something permanent from raw stone. Guillaume shows you a dressed block that's been finished to precise dimensions, smooth surfaces meeting at perfect 90-degree angles, and you can see the satisfaction in his face. This block will outlast everyone currently alive, he says. Centuries from now, when we're all dust, this stone will still be holding up a cathedral wall. That means something. It does mean something, apparently. You watch the skilled masons work on decorative pieces. Capitals with carved foliage, corbels with grotesque faces. And there's genuine artistry happening here. Jean, that Freemason you saw working on the voussoir, spends 3 days carving a single block into an elaborate foliate design, leaves and vines emerging from the stone in delicate relief. When he finishes, he steps back and just looks at it for a long moment, and you realize he's experiencing something close to joy. This thing he made will be installed in a cathedral where thousands of people will see it. It bears no signature, no attribution. Medieval craftsmen didn't sign their work, but he knows he made it, and that knowledge clearly matters to him. This is why, Jean says, catching you watching him. Not the wages, though those are necessary. Not even the guild status, though that's valuable. This, he touches the carved stone gently. This is why. I took formless rock and made it beautiful. How many people get to say that about their work? Small John has a simpler but equally valid reason. Camaraderie. These men are the closest thing to family I've got. He admits one evening. My actual family? Dead, scattered, or might as well be dead for all I see them. But here we look out for each other. When I was sick last winter, Peter brought me food from his own portions. When Flanders got injured, remember when that chisel fragment caught him in the arm? I helped him with his work until he healed. We survive together or we die together, and that creates bonds. He's describing something that wouldn't be formally recognized for centuries. Workplace solidarity. The bonds formed between people who share danger and hardship. The quarrymen genuinely care about each other's survival, not just because losing a crew member means more work for everyone else, but because they've developed authentic connections. They celebrate together when a particularly difficult block splits cleanly. They mourn together when someone dies. They share food, tools, knowledge, and the occasional flask of wine stolen from the barber surgeon's supplies. There's also a certain dark humor that develops among people who regularly face death. The jokes are terrible. Puns about dropping in, when someone falls, referring to crushed limbs as stone kisses, calling the barber surgeon Dr. Hacksaw to his face. But the humor serves a purpose, making the horror slightly more bearable through shared laughter. When a rope fails during a lift and everyone has to scatter, someone inevitably makes a comment about unscheduled weight loss programs. And the laughter that follows is as much relief at survival as amusement at the joke. You're beginning to develop these bonds yourself. When you mess up a basic task, spill an entire bucket of water and sand mixture, ruin the consistency, Peter doesn't berate you, just shows you again how to mix it properly. When your wrapped hands are bleeding through the linen, Flanders provides more of that foul-smelling paste without being asked. When you're too exhausted to make the climb out of the quarry at day's end, Small John waits with you, making sure you don't collapse halfway up and tumble back down. We take care of our own, Small John explains, because nobody else will. Guillaume himself, despite his position of authority, is part of this collective. He eats the same food as the workers: bread, cheese, occasional dried meat when available. He breathes the same dust, faces the same dangers when he's personally inspecting cuts or testing stone. The social distance between master mason and laborer is significant, sure, but it's not insurmountable. Guillaume started exactly where you are now, hauling rubble and breathing dust, and he hasn't forgotten it. When he disciplines someone for sloppy work, it's not from aristocratic disdain, but from genuine concern that mistakes get people killed. There's also a weird pride in surviving the quarry. The workers compare scars and injuries like badges of honor. See this finger? Lost the tip when a chisel slipped. That's nothing. I've got a dent in my skull from a hammer bounce you could hide a walnut in. It's perverse but understandable. If you're going to suffer, you might as well take pride in having endured it. The men who've been here longest, who bear the most scars and lung damage, carry a certain status. They're the survivors, the ones who were tough enough or lucky enough or skilled enough to keep going when others died or quit. Old Bernard, coughing blood and still carving, is treated with genuine reverence. Not because he's particularly pleasant, he's actually fairly grumpy, but because he represents the possibility of longevity in a profession that usually offers none. He's proof that it's possible to grow old as a mason, even if old means 50 and growing means accumulating chronic disabilities faster than years. The younger workers, the apprentices and new journeymen, look at Bernard with something between hope and horror. Hope that they might last as long, horror at what lasting that long costs. His hands are twisted from decades of hammer work, the joints swollen and misaligned. His back is so curved he can barely stand upright. His breathing sounds like stone scraping against stone. But he's alive, he's working, and he's still creating beautiful carvings. That has to count for something. You ask Bernard directly one afternoon, "Why do you keep working? You've outlasted most men in this trade. Surely you've saved enough to retire." He laughs, which triggers a coughing fit, which takes a full minute to subside. When he can speak again, "Retire to what? Sit in a room and wait to die? At least here I'm useful. My hands still work, barely, and I can still see the stone clearly enough to carve. When I can't anymore, then I'll retire. Until then, this is what I do. This is who I am." Identity. That's another reason people stay. After years of cutting stone, it becomes more than a job. It becomes your fundamental identity. You're not just a person who happens to work in a quarry. You're a quarryman, a mason, and that distinction becomes core to your sense of self. Take away the work and what's left? Who are you if not the person who can read stone, who can make precise cuts, who survived the quarry when others didn't? The guild system reinforces this identity. Once you're certified as a journeyman or master, you're part of a brotherhood that extends across regions, even countries. Masons from England can find work in France because the guild certification is recognized. The knowledge is portable, the skills are valued, and membership in the guild provides both economic security and social status. You're not just a random laborer anymore, you're a certified craftsman with recognized expertise. Even you, still firmly at the bottom of the hierarchy, feel the beginning of this identity forming. When someone from outside the quarry, a carter, a merchant's assistant, looks at the operation and comments on the danger or the dust, you find yourself defending it. It's not that bad if you know what you're doing, you hear yourself saying, despite the fact that it absolutely is that bad, and knowing what you're doing just makes you statistically less likely to die on any given day. The truth, you're realizing, is that people stay for a complicated mix of reasons. Economic necessity, possibility of advancement, pride in craft, social bonds, identity, and sheer stubbornness. The quarry offers something that medieval society rarely provides to common people. A chance to matter, to create something lasting, to be part of something larger than yourself. Yes, it might kill you. Yes, you'll definitely suffer. But you'll suffer as someone who built cathedrals, who shaped stone that will outlast kingdoms, who was part of the great construction projects that define an era. Is that worth your legs? Your lungs? Your life? Ask 10 quarrymen and you'll get 10 different answers, but they're all still here, swinging hammers and breathing dust, so the answer is apparently yes. Or at least, yes enough to keep coming back tomorrow, which in the medieval economy is the same thing. 2 weeks into your quarry career, if you can call survival a career, you're beginning to move differently. Your body has adapted in small, terrible ways that you're only now noticing. Your hands have developed calluses thick enough that you barely feel the rope anymore. Layers of dead skin protecting the raw flesh underneath. Your shoulders have broadened from constant lifting, muscles building in response to demands that would have been impossible that first day. Your legs know the climbing path out of the quarry so intimately that you can make the ascent half asleep, feet finding holds automatically while your conscious mind drifts elsewhere. But the changes aren't all improvements. Your cough is permanent now, a constant companion that wakes you at night and accompanies every deep breath. There's a persistent ache in your lower back, right at the base of your spine, from the repetitive strain of lifting and carrying. Your knees make sounds they didn't make before, clicks and pops that Flanders assures you are normal, in the way that everything terrible becomes normal if you experience it long enough. You're aging in fast forward, your body accumulating where that should take decades compressed into days. The sun is setting earlier now, it's late May edging toward June, and the evening light turns the quarry walls golden, almost beautiful if you can ignore the fact that this hole in the ground is slowly killing everyone in it. You're helping to secure tools for the night, wrapping chisels in oiled cloth to prevent rust, coiling ropes according to Flanders' exacting standards, when Guillaume calls everyone together for an announcement. The cathedral chapter has requested a site visit, he says. They want to inspect our operation, verify the stone quality before they commit to the next contract. That means tomorrow we make this quarry look like we know what we're doing. He pauses for effect. Clean up the rubble piles, organize the tool stations, and for the love of all that's holy, try not to kill anyone while important people are watching. There's nervous laughter at this because the idea that you'd modify dangerous behavior based on observers rather than, not wanting to die, is absurd but also completely accurate to medieval workplace culture. Safety matters when clients are watching. The rest of the time, it's negotiable. The next morning arrives with unusual energy. The quarry gets a cleaning it hasn't seen in months. Debris swept into less visible piles, bloodstains scrubbed from prominent rocks, tools arranged in neat rows that will last approximately 10 minutes once actual work resumes. Even the workers clean up marginally, beating dust from their tunics and attempting to look like professional stoneworkers rather than refugees from a limestone apocalypse. The cathedral delegation arrives at mid-morning. 3 men in clerical robes that have never seen a day of manual labor, accompanied by their own master mason who's clearly here to actually evaluate the work while the clergy provide ecclesiastical authority and funding approval. They pick their way down into the quarry like they're descending into hell itself. Robes hiked up to avoid the dust and mud, expressions suggesting they're deeply regretting this field trip. Guillaume transforms into a completely different person. Articulate, diplomatic, suddenly capable of explaining complex masonry concepts in terms that non-masons can understand. He shows them examples of finished blocks, points out the consistent bedding planes in the quarry face, demonstrates the testing procedures used to verify stone quality. It's a performance, carefully choreographed to inspire confidence and secure the contract. The visiting master mason, though, isn't here for theater. His name is Robert, no relation to the Robert who died last week, and he immediately starts his own inspection, tapping stones, examining cut surfaces, checking the precision of dress blocks against his own templates. He's evaluating Guillaume's operation the way a general might inspect troops, looking for weaknesses, testing competence. "This block here," Robert says, indicating a finished piece waiting for transport. "Show me the cut faces." Guillaume doesn't hesitate, confident in his crew's work. The block gets rotated so all faces are visible, and Robert runs his hands over each surface, checking for flatness, squareness, consistency. He pulls out a straight edge, a precisely made wooden tool that reveals any deviations from true flat, and tests each face methodically. "Acceptable," he finally pronounces, which from a master mason is apparently high praise. "Your hewers know their craft. What about the decorative work?" The chapter wants carved capitals for the choir columns. Jean gets summoned along with his most recent carving, that foliate capital he spent 3 days perfecting. Robert examines it with the kind of attention an art appraiser might give a painting, checking the depth of relief, the crispness of details, the symmetry of the design. He even pulls out a small measuring tool to verify that the capital's dimensions match the specifications. "This is fine work," Robert admits. "Who carved this?" "Jean, sir," Guillaume responds. "Journeyman, 10 years experience, trained in the French style." "I can see that." Robert turns to Jean directly. "You learned from Guillaume?" "Yes, sir, and from the previous master before him." "It shows. The acanthus leaves are properly undercut. The drill work is clean. This would be acceptable in Notre Dame itself." This is apparently the highest compliment possible in the masonry world, because Jean actually flushes with pride and several nearby workers grin. The clerics are less interested in technical quality and more interested in cost and timeline. "Master Guillaume," one of them says, a bishop, based on the fancy robes and the ring he keeps adjusting. The chapter requires 400 dressed blocks and 30 carved capitals delivered by Michaelmas. "Is this achievable?" Guillaume doesn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Grace. We'll need to expand operations to the north face, hire additional hewers, and run extended shifts, but it's achievable." "And the cost?" Guillaume names a figure that makes you mentally calculate how many months of your labor that represents. It's staggering, enough money to buy a small farm or a house in town or probably fund a minor war. The bishop doesn't even blink. "Acceptable. Draw up the formal contract. The chapter will provide a deposit of 1/3 upon signing, with the remainder on delivery and installation." Just like that, Guillaume has secured work that will keep this quarry operating for months, employment for dozens of men, and probably a substantial profit for himself. You're witnessing medieval business conducted at the highest level, and it's surprisingly straightforward. Demonstrate quality, agree on price, shake hands. No lawyers, no lengthy negotiations, just a master mason's word and a bishop's authority. After the delegation departs, climbing out of the quarry with considerably less dignity than they descended, Guillaume gathers the crew again. You heard the contract. 400 blocks, 30 capitals by Michaelmas. That's roughly 4 months. We're going to be working extended hours, probably 6 days a week, possibly 7 if we fall behind. Anyone who can't commit to that, speak now. Nobody speaks. 4 months of brutal work is still 4 months of wages. And in the medieval economy, you don't turn down paying work because it's hard. Everything is hard. Good. We start the expanded operations tomorrow. Peter, you'll take a crew to the north face and begin initial cutting. Flanders, you're on training. We've got 5 new workers arriving from the village. Need them functional quickly. Small John, your crew chief on transport operations. Questions? The assignments continue, and you realize the quarry is about to transform from its current operation to something larger, faster, and probably more dangerous. More workers mean more potential for accidents. Extended hours mean fatigue, and fatigue means mistakes. The pressure to meet the cathedral deadline will push everyone harder, test the limits of these medieval safety practices, such as they are, and probably result in more graves near the quarry edge. But there's also excitement. This is a major contract, the kind of project that makes reputations. The workers who contribute to this cathedral will be part of something that might stand for centuries. Their carved stones, their precisely dressed blocks, their sweat and blood and probably some of their lungs will be incorporated into a structure that defines the skyline, that speaks to the glory of God and the ambition of man and the skill of craftsmen who shaped stone with iron tools and determination. That evening, as the sun finally drops below the quarry rim and long shadows fill the pit, you sit with Small John and Peter on a finished block, eating bread and cheese and sharing a flask of ale someone acquired. Your hands hurt, your back aches, your cough rattles your chest with every breath. You've been here 2 weeks and already you can feel the quarry changing you, wearing you down, reshaping you into something harder and more damaged. Think we'll make it? You ask. 4 months of this pace? Peter considers the question seriously. Some of us will. Some won't. That's always true. He takes a drink, passes the flask. But the stone doesn't care about our suffering. The cathedral needs blocks, so we provide blocks. Whether we survive the providing, that's between us and God, I suppose. That's cheerful, Small John mutters, but he's smiling slightly. Here's what I think. We've got work, we've got wages, and we're building something that matters. Could be worse. We could be soldiers dying for some noble's land dispute, or farmers starving through another bad harvest. At least our suffering has purpose. You look around the quarry, at the scars on the walls where stone has been removed, at the dressed blocks waiting for transport, at the tools that tomorrow will resume their rhythmic assault on limestone. This place has killed people. It's killing you right now, slowly, breath by dusty breath. But Small John isn't wrong. There's purpose here, meaning in the creation, value in the craft. Guillaume walks past, making his final inspection rounds, and pauses near your group. You 3, good work today. Presenting well for clients, that matters. Shows professionalism. He starts to move on, then stops. The new contract means opportunities. Work hard, survive long enough, there's room for advancement. Particularly you, Peter, you're ready to start journeyman training proper. And you, he looks at you. You've lasted longer than most new workers. Keep it up and we'll get you into actual skilled work. After Guillaume leaves, you sit in the gathering darkness and try to process this. 2 weeks ago, you were terrified and clueless. Now you're apparently showing enough promise that the Master Mason thinks you might have a future here. Whether that future ends in mastery or an unmarked grave remains to be seen, but the possibility exists. The stars begin appearing overhead, points of light in the darkening sky, and the quarry slowly empties as workers make their way to sleeping quarters or homes in the village. You stay a bit longer, sitting on stone that your hands help dress, in a quarry that's simultaneously trying to kill you and offering you a chance at something more than bare subsistence. Tomorrow, the expanded operations begin. More stone will be cut, more dust will be breathed, more risks will be taken in pursuit of a cathedral's glory. You'll wake up coughing, wrap your damaged hands, descend into the pit, and continue the work that's destroying your body while building your future. This is the quarry. This is the life. This is why you wouldn't last a day, except you've lasted 2 weeks, and somehow you'll probably last longer. Not because you're particularly brave or skilled, but because once the quarry gets into your blood, once you've felt the satisfaction of splitting stone cleanly or dressing a block to precise dimensions, once you've bonded with the men who share the danger and dust, leaving becomes harder than staying. The stone calls you back, day after day, breath after dusty breath, and you answer because this is what you do now. This is who you're becoming. A quarryman, a mason, a person who shapes the bones of the earth into monuments that will outlast memory. And if that costs you your legs, your lungs, your life, well, you'll be in good company. The quarry has claimed countless others before you and will claim countless more after. But their stone still stands, still bears weight, still whispers of the hands that shaped it and the lives that were spent in its creation. The work continues tomorrow. It always does. The stone is patient, eternal, waiting for your hands to give it purpose. And you, despite everything, can't wait to begin. The quarry fills with darkness now, shadows pooling in the cuts and crevices, settling over the dressed blocks like a blanket. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, a sound that seems impossibly peaceful after the day's cacophony of hammers and splitting stone. You take one last look at the quarry walls, at the evidence of human determination carved into ancient rock, and make your way toward the ladder. Your hands find the rungs automatically, muscle memory already forming after just 2 weeks. You climb slowly, feeling the ache in your shoulders, the tightness in your chest when you breathe deeply. At the top, you pause and look back down into the darkness where tomorrow you'll return. The quarry waits, patient and hungry, ready to take whatever you're willing to give. Your strength, your health, your years. And you'll give it because that's the bargain. That's always been the bargain. For every worker who's descended into that pit and emerged changed, diminished, but somehow more than they were before. You walk toward the sleeping quarters where a straw mattress and a chorus of coughing men await. Tomorrow comes early here. It always has. The stone doesn't sleep, doesn't rest, doesn't care about your exhaustion or fear. It simply waits for hands skilled enough or desperate enough to shape it, to drag it from the earth and transform it into something that transcends the individual lives spent in its creation. And somehow, incredibly, terribly, beautifully, that's enough. That has to be enough. Because tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until either you've built something magnificent or the quarry has claimed you entirely. The stone remembers everyone who touched it, even if no one else does. Every block you dress carries the evidence of your hands, your efforts, your particular way of reading the grain and applying the chisel. Long after you're gone, and you will be gone, whether to old age or accident or the slow suffocation of stone lung, the cathedral will stand. Your work will bear weight, will catch light, will shelter the faithful who never knew your name but benefit from your craft. That's the trade. That's the reason. That's why men return to the quarry day after day, generation after generation, trading their mortal bodies for immortal stone. And despite everything, despite the danger and the dust and the deaths, it's a trade that somehow makes sense in the medieval mathematics of meaning and survival. The sleeping quarters ahead glow with dim firelight. Inside, men like you are settling in for the night, bodies exhausted, lungs protesting, already dreading and anticipating tomorrow's return to the pit. You're one of them now. The quarry has marked you, claimed you, inducted you into the brotherhood of those who cut stone and breathe dust and somehow find purpose in the grinding labor of medieval construction. Your feet carry you forward, toward rest that will never quite feel like enough, toward dreams that probably involve falling rock and failed ropes, toward sleep that will be interrupted by your own coughing and the coughing of everyone around you. But also toward tomorrow, when the sun will rise over the quarry rim, when the stone will wait patient and indifferent, when Guillaume will gather the crews and assign the day's cuts, when you'll descend once more into that hole in the earth and continue the work of transforming raw limestone into architectural glory. This is your life now. This is the quarry. This is why you wouldn't last a day in a medieval stonemason's quarry, Except you do, and somehow, against all reasonable odds, you will again tomorrow. Sweet dreams. If dreams are possible when every breath tastes like dust and every muscle aches with the memory of stone. The quarry will be waiting when you wake. The quarry always waits.